Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier. Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Bélard.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément. Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen. Monsieur le connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Southern. Madame le deputy Labby. Monsieur le deputy Tadier. Monsieur le deputy Luce.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Doublé. Monsieur le deputy Morel.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Lehegara.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Ayer.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Alves.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Gardner. Monsieur le deputy Gorst. Monsieur le deputy Farnham. Madame le deputy Moore.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Mezek. Monsieur le deputy Joseph.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Balash.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Poré.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Wall.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Miles.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Renner.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Binet.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Jeune.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Miller.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Binet. Monsieur le deputy Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac. Monsieur le deputy Curtis. Madame le deputy Ward.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le deputy Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Andrews.
Monsieur le greffier.
Prions Dieu. Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi les gouvernements et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom, nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, et de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit, que toute la délibération étant accompagnée de ta bénédiction, réussisse au bien et au soulagement du peuple qui t'a plu de commettre le soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné de t'invoquer en disant « Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous induis point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car toi est le règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
De feu.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
De feu.
Monsieur le deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Labby.
Oh, please could Deputy Labby be marked excused because she's on state's business in Zambia.
State's
Thank you.
business. Thank you.
Monsieur le deputy Tadier.
De feu.
Madame le deputy Doublé.
Présente.
Monsieur le deputy Gorst.
Présent.
Monsieur le deputy Farnham.
De feu.
Monsieur le deputy Mezek.
Présent.
Madame le deputy Kovac.
Les États sont constitués. Turning to the order paper, the next item is the draft Elections Amendment Law lodged by the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. The main respondent is the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Elections Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend the Elections Jersey Law 2002, the Elections Jersey Regulations 2002, and the Political Parties Registration Jersey Law 2008. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Chair, do you wish to propose the principles of this law?
Sorry. Most of the proposed changes to the Elections Jersey Law 2002 are administrative in nature and designed to improve the electoral system for candidates, voters, and those tasked with running the process. They are based on the recommendations contained within the CPA Election Observers Mission EOM Report 2022, published after the last elections, and also the report of the Jersey Electoral Authority R3 2022, and feedback from the electoral administrators. Probably the most contentious element is an amendment to Article 4 of the Elections Law in response to one of the Election Observers Mission's recommendations and would extend to voting rights to all prisoners based in Jersey. Currently, those detained in Jersey for longer than 4 years are disqualified from voting. In 2005, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the UK was in breach of Article 3 of Protocol No. 1 of the European Convention on Human Rights in relation to prisoner voting rights. The central element to the ruling was that the UK's then blanket ban on prisoner voting was indiscriminate and disproportionate. The UK now allows those on remand and awaiting sentencing to vote, but does not extend it to all prisoners. Northern Ireland follows the same rules. Scotland has extended the vote to those serving a sentence of less than 12 months, whilst Wales has been considering employing the same 4-year sentence limit as currently exists in Jersey. Ireland has extended voting rights to all prisoners, irrespective of length of sentence, and it did this in 2006. Both Guernsey and the Isle of Man offer full enfranchisement, and prisoners are able to vote by post for representatives of the district in which they were ordinarily resident prior to incarceration. PPC believes it is time for Jersey to make voting available for all prisoners, irrespective of their sentence length. Other changes, as I have said, are mostly administrative and include a revised definition of a spoilt vote. Alterations to how candidates' addresses are published if they wish to use an alternative, changes to some of the processes around pre-poll and postal voting, mostly to accommodate the move to a Sunday election, and an extension of the Jersey Electoral Authority's remit to include the consideration of complaints from the public about the elections process and candidates, and also creating a coordinating role for the JEA around the arrangements for hustings. I should point out that there is a typo in the report accompanying the legislation on page 5, thank you, in that section referencing Article 41. Sorry, I'll say that again. I should point out there is a typo in the report accompanying the legislation on page 5, and that the section referencing Article 41 is superfluous, as no change is made to that article. I hope that members will be supportive of these changes to the elections law. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Are the principles seconded?
Sir, before we start, may I raise the defo on Deputy Tadier?
Members content to raise a defo on Deputy Tadier? The defo is raised. Does any member wish to speak on the principles of this law? Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. And I must apologise to States members because I actually raised this point in respect of the proposition that was debated yesterday. So I've unwittingly taken 2 bites of the apple cherry. Article 5, I did ask the chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee just to give a little bit more information about the complaints process that's going to be used by the electoral authority, Article 5 extends its ability to look at complaints. So that's against members of the public can complain about candidates or election officials. And members are aware that it's generally, I have been looking at complaints and I've been seeing the complaints processes popping up all over the place. Some not very well publicised, some not very clear. And in addition, I've asked, well, if somebody is not happy with the complaints process, with the way that the complaints are handled, to whom will they appeal? So would that be, well, actually at the moment, I don't believe it can be the Jersey Complaints panel because that tends to relate to departments and ministers of government. So is that going to be to the PPC? How will they handle it? And clearly that's not been addressed at the law currently. So my question had been whether the PPC has considered that. Is it going to consider that? Is it going to resolve that? What would its proposals be? Because I feel that this particular part of the law is not particularly clear, and it would be helpful for those details to be sorted before this we actually expand the powers of the authority in this way. Sorry, somebody's frowning at me. Okay, thank you. Oh, sorry, sir. Right, so just that, sir, thank you. But generally, in terms of what's being trying to be achieved by the law, then I am supportive of it. Thank you, sir.
So may I ask for clarification?
Of the last speaker?
Yeah, it wasn't
if
a frown,
If she's
it was a
prepared
genuine
to
question.
give that clarification.
Does the speaker mean Article 13D, Part 5 of the report? Because I do the same thing all the time. 5 is about the... because we're looking at the right things then. Because Article 5 is actually about becoming resident and becomes ordinarily resident of the articles. Is it paragraph 5? Thank you, sir. I just so I know I'm looking at the right things.
Yes, you referred to Article 5, Deputy Scott, in your speech. Did you mean Article 5 or another article when you
I'm looking
addressed?
at Article 5 of the law, sir, which refers to Article 13D, Resolution of Disputes Amended. I hope that clarifies things for the Deputy.
Yes, Article 5 of this law, which refers to Article 13D.
I see, yeah. That's not the first time I got that mistake, sir.
Yes. Does any other member speak on the principles of this law? Yes, Deputy Morrell, then Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I've got to admit, I'm not particularly supportive of this change. I do think that when it comes to voting, it does pay to have spent some time, probably more than a year, living in a jurisdiction to fully understand. Apologies.
But we'll come to that when we come to that article in the amendment.
Sorry.
Yes, Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. After having learnt yesterday that despite the valiant attempts and the good attempts of PPC, we learnt that I think that legislation, as had been custom and practice for PPC, had not received the constructive second pair of eyes review by the Corporate Services Panel. And so, if I may, in supporting the principles, may I respectfully suggest that the Chair could pause for consideration of the articles so that they can be reviewed, no doubt, from the questions that have been raised. I do have one question. I know that there is hustings fatigue in the super constituencies. That's certainly been an issue for those parishes that have multiple parishes. So we have already passed the principle of senators, and there's going to have to be consideration in any event of should this assembly finally assent to the arrangements for the senatorial hustings. So this is actually going to have to be dealt with in that way. And for that reason, but not exclusively, I would respectfully suggest that this assembly takes the good practice of not passing a piece of legislation, first reading, second reading and third reading in one go, mindful of the fact that it's not had that constructive second pair of eyes, which could be probably quite quick by corporate services, and I would encourage them to do that. I would make that suggestion, but I'm sure the Chair may wish to do so, and that may avoid members having to pick on articles at speed during the course of this, and we could use this Assembly's time more constructively with the full report coming back. So I support these changes. It's good that election observers have come to Jersey, having been one before. Their report has obviously been taken seriously, but it needs a second pair of eyes from corporate services, and I'm grateful. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Gorst.
I wasn't expecting to follow Deputy Joseph, but I agree with him because I do have some concerns, as the Chair mentioned, about Article 4. We seem to have taken a view based on an ECHR ruling in relation to another jurisdiction which had a blanket ban. We are not in that position. We did make those changes to eligibility for voting some time ago. I can't remember quite at the time whether I was convinced that it was necessary, but I think I was. But removing that restriction in its entirety is something that I would not be able to support, and I do wonder if more work and review of that should be appropriately considered, just because, and I make no disrespect to the electoral observers mission, just because they've made a recommendation, we have to carefully consider it and see whether it fits in with what we think is appropriate for enfranchisement. And it does, when yesterday we were talking about strengthening penalties for inappropriate behaviour in our island. Today we are making an alternate position, and I think we just need to be joined up in that regard. So if I don't know whether the chair of CSSP is thinking of calling it in, as is her right, under standing orders, I just want to say that I can vote in principle for this, but I would support that review. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the principles? I call upon the Chair to reply. Chair of PPC.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank members for the points they've raised. PPC took a pragmatic approach to the recommendations made by key stakeholders and the election observers after the last elections, and was mindful that after implementing major changes in 2022, it was more a case of evolution than revolution this time round, and we are confident that these mostly administrative amendments will allow the elections to run smoothly in 2026. These are Deputy Joseph said that he was unhappy about scrutiny, but these are purely administrative changes. And Deputy Gorst, they are mentioned the EOM recommendations. It's entirely for this Assembly to determine, which is why the committee is putting this for members to choose. And PPC has no strong view on this. Thank you, sir. So, I was going to take the articles separately.
In due course, after the principle's been adopted, yes. But
Yes, please.
before we do that, we'll need to obviously deal with the principles.
So may I lift a defer on Deputy Farnham, please?
Members content to raise the defer on Deputy? Yes, the defer is raised on the Chief Minister. Call for the appel? The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the principles have been adopted. 44 votes pour, 1 vote contre.
Could we have the one, please, sir?
Deputy Morel voted contre.
Deputy Miles, does the Corporate Services Screening Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
I think after what happened yesterday, the answer is yes, sir, we will be calling this in, but I would undertake to do this as quickly as possible.
The date must be set when the second reading will take place, no more than 4 meetings' time. When do you propose? There's a meeting at the end of June, and there's one in early July.
Did you say 4 meetings?
No,
time?
no more than 4 meetings' time. There's 2 meetings in June and 1 in July, and then of course we're into the autumn.
Let's go for the end of June, but obviously if we're
Yes, of
able to
course.
bring it back sooner, we'll bring it back sooner.
Yes, so deferred to the end of June.
So,
Yes.
So I note that there is an amendment to one of the articles, and I wonder if the chair of CSSP might also consider reviewing that amendment in the course of the panel's work, please.
Yes.
So that was my understanding. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The next item is social rents plan to reduce rental stress for tenants, lodged by Deputy Kovacs. The main respondent is the Minister for Housing. Deputy Kovacs, there is an amendment lodged by the Minister. Do you accept this amendment?
Yes, sir.
Are members content for the proposition to be read as amended?
No, sir. No, sir.
No, sir. Thank you very much. In that case, we will deal with
May I ask, sir, about this amendment? Is this a government amendment that's got the support of the Council of Ministers, or is just, I understand that Deputy...
You will learn in due course.
Okay.
The answer to that question, I imagine. I don't know the answer to that question. I ask the greffier to read the proposition in its original form.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to agree that from January 2027, social housing rent should be set at a rate that does not put tenants in rental stress, and to request the Minister for Housing, in consultation with the Minister for Treasury and Resources, to plan a revised housing rental policy on the basis of this principle, and to bring that policy to the Assembly for endorsement by January 2026.
Deputy Kovacs.
Thank you, sir. The proposition before you today is simple in wording, but profound in implication. It asks this Assembly to agree to one clear principle, that social housing rents in Jersey should not push people into rental stress. This is not a theoretical debate. For many tenants, it's a matter of daily survival. The stress of opening a rent bill and realizing that paying it means cutting back on food, heating, or essentials for their children. I brought this proposition forward after 2 key moments. First, seeing the 2024 Jersey Opinion and Lifestyle Survey, which showed that over half of our social housing tenants are struggling with rent, even with support from benefits. And second, a media article about social rents in the Isle of Man, where similar flats, even by the same developer, are being let at around a third of the cost of equivalent units here in Jersey. This raised the fundamental question: how did we end up in a position where our safety net, social housing, is pushing people into poverty? Let's look at the facts. The average social rent in 2023 was $1,118 per month, unaffordable for many pensioners and low-income families. 24% of people live in households earning below 60% of the median after housing costs. 38% of low-income households are pensioners. Those in the lowest income decile are spending up to 56% of their income on rent, even after benefits. And 53% of social tenants still say their rent is unaffordable. This tells us one thing: the system, even with its good intentions, is not working the way it should. Our current model is based on cost recovery, covering loans, maintenance, and past underinvestments. But the burden of that cost is falling directly on tenants, many of whom are now paying not just for their homes, but for decades of neglect and delay. Estates like Lesquez and Ancourt and others were left to decay. When the solution finally came, we borrowed to rebuild, and those loans are now being repaid through rents. In effect, tenants who lived through that period or underinvestment are now being charged to fix it. Income support helps, and I don't dismiss its value, but it masks the problem rather than solves it. You cannot fix structural issues with just temporary subsidies. What we need is a shift in principle. This proposition does not ask the Assembly to set a specific rent cap or implement instant changes. It asks us to support a direction, that social rents must be generally affordable, that tenants should not need state support just to survive in a system designed for affordability. and that housing policy must be built on dignity, fairness, and long-term sustainability, not just financial spreadsheets. I wanted to accept the Minister's amendment because it preserves the heart of the proposition while enabling the proper review process, while not tying the hands of the next assembly and informing the decision of the plans that will be brought. Consultation, financial modeling, tenant engagement, and practical planning for the future would be with that. So, as I said, this is not about tying future ministers' hands. It's about giving this issue the urgency and direction it demands. Yes, this is a complex process. Yes, it will take time. But if we don't take this step now, we're simply going to keep spinning the wheels of a broken system, relying on subsidies to paper over unaffordable rents. We need to ask ourselves, if the housing model isn't viable without setting rents people cannot afford, then it is the model, not the people, that need to change. This proposition is an important starting point, I would say. It opens the door to policies that align social rent with what people can reasonably pay and ensures that social housing delivers real social value. Sir, this Assembly has often said that housing is a priority. This is a chance to show we mean it. By backing this principle today, we take a thoughtful, necessary step towards a more just, stable, and affordable housing system for all of Jersey, allowing the Housing Minister to bring back viable plans to address these issues without impacting development. Sir, I make the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded? Thank you very much. There is an amendment lodged by the Minister for Housing, and I ask the greffier to read that amendment.
After the words "to agree," insert the words "with the principle." After the word "that," delete the words "from January 2027" and insert the word "the." After the word "social housing rents," insert the words "and system and income support policies." After the word "should," delete the words "be set at a rate that does." After the words "in consultation with the Minister for Treasury and Resources," insert the words "and Minister for Social Security." For the words "plan for a revised housing rental policy," substitute the words "assess options for a revised social housing rental policy." And for the words "to bring that policy to the Assembly for endorsement by January 2026," substitute the words "to present those options to the Assembly by January 2026 to inform future decisions of the Assembly."
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm very grateful for Deputy Kovacs for bringing forward her proposition. I think that she touches on something that will be of great interest to many people across our island. And I would actually say that it's very timely in that we have very recently celebrated the 10-year anniversary of the establishment of Andium Homes, something that I think history now teaches us was a very good thing to have done and something that will have benefited many islanders in the improvement in the quality of the homes they live in, and a building programme which is providing more and more homes for people who need them. Deputy Kovacs is right, though, that when Andium was established, it came at a point where there had been decades, I think it's fair to say, of social housing in Jersey not being managed properly, not being invested in at the rates it should have been. And in order to overcome that and facilitate the creation of Andium and the new model for Jersey, a rents policy was put in place, which was put in place for the moment for that moment in time, in the judgment of those around at the time, that it was the right thing to do. We're now 10 years on from then, so let's have a look at it to see if it's still fit for purpose, to see if there are tweaks that could be made to improve it, to see if there is a better balance that could be come up with that meets the needs of tenants to not be put into rental stress whilst supporting the broader financial model of Andium and its ability to deliver its building programme. And so what's being asked to conduct that review I regard as a useful exercise, and following discussions with the Social Security Minister, the Treasury Minister and the proposer of the proposition, I think we basically managed to workshop a wording on this that I think better fits for the moment to enable us to do this work without tying our hands behind our back and committing us to actions in the future that fit a timetable we might not be ready to consider, or without asking members to agree to the wholesale reform of the social housing rent system without actually knowing what those changes will be. So I'm very grateful to Deputy Kovacs for supporting that and indicating to the Assembly that she's happy to accept the amendment. I would love to know if there was any specific reason beyond his absolute democratic right on this, if Deputy Alex Curtis had particular concerns about it, because I would have wanted to have tried to address them in my opening speech, but of course I'll be happy to do that in a closing one if he's got a particular point or argument he'd like to make as to whether the amendment is suitable. But I would urge members to support the amendment because it does, I think, better enable me as Housing Minister to conduct a review of the social housing rent system and do that in consultation not just with the Treasury Minister but with the Social Security Minister, who's responsible for income support policies, which are inevitably going to be a part of this, and also to highlight to members that this amended version of the proposition would result in me bringing a report to the Assembly before the end of this term of office, and it is not tying our hands to agreeing in this moment in time to any future reform later on without knowing what the implications are of that. It simply gives me the authorisation to go ahead and do some work about what's possible, and in finding out what's possible, members then can think whether any changes are necessary, but we're not tying our hands to do that. And so that's why we came to the conclusion all round that this amendment would be a good way forward on this, and so I make the amendment.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the amendment seconded? Yes. Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? Deputy Andrews.
Sorry, sir, I just want to declare I have an interest. I am a Andium tenant, so I think it's probably best that I abstain because I just don't think it'd be right if I vote on something that potentially could benefit me.
So is there a requirement to abstain? Could you rule on that? It's an interest shared by a large member of the public, albeit not of states members.
Just consult Standing Order 106. Certainly, any interest in terms of being an Andean tenant, as it's shared with a large number of people, would not prevent anyone from voting on this proposition. I don't think in the circumstances it's necessary for a member to declare an interest, but if he or she wishes to do so as an Andean tenant, they may, but they're certainly able to vote on this proposition and indeed speak upon it if they wish. Yes. Does any of you wish to speak on this proposition? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. And firstly, I would like to thank Deputy Kovacs for raising with the Assembly an important topic and question, as is her right to do so in a proposition. The Minister has proposed amendment, and as he said, it is our right to debate that separately. And I have to say, I don't think it is right that the Assembly would have taken this as amended without a debate. The proposition is dramatic. Members will read that either way. It's dramatic in a progressive sense. It's dramatic in a sense that it proposes change very quickly. But that is what the proposer asked for. They asked for clear dates. They asked for a very clear requirement. And they provided their reasoning and their rationale in what was a multi-page report with statistics, data, and their urge. And the result of a ministerial amendment is, in essence, to water it down so far that we may ask why we're debating this. The Minister, in proposing his amendment, said that it's a good thing that we do this. And I would agree that the principle to which he most spoke about, which was that of evaluating how our social housing system is funded and ultimately the cost of that, That's a really important job, sir. I wish we had someone to do that. We do. He's called the Housing Minister. And that sounds like business as usual to me. Reviewing how social housing works, whether it still is appropriate to the needs of the island, to those who use that service, should be business as usual. And I think it's a genuine question. We're ultimately asking to accept something that in some ways is so benign. I don't see the value in doing so. We have a chance to take a really poignant vote if we vote unamended on this. We can decide, do we agree with Deputy Kovacs, or do we let the Housing Minister follow his usual work of reviewing social housing? And so that's my first question. My second one is, this gives the Minister 3 bites at the cherry to talk today, and I think that's really important. If I didn't do this, I'm sure he'll have a lot of valuable things to say, including explaining in more detail, perhaps in just his opening, what was wrong with the first proposition, the value in amending it, and also maybe a little more detail as to how he engaged with the proposer prior to any lodging. And I think that's really important to understand, notwithstanding, I mean, the fact that the Minister and the proposer are in the same party. We know, and it is a credit to them, that they work really well together as a party to bring cohesive propositions to the Assembly, which have had so much success. I don't say this negatively, so it is interesting to read a proposition, quite frankly, sir, from one party member amended so drastically by the other. And I don't say this to be negative or to actually have a go at either the move of the original proposition or the amender. But it's something we have to talk about here to understand the processes behind what's happening in this Assembly, how the Assembly can work valuably together to make good propositions and work with the government or challenge the government. And I think that's a conversation we need to have. And this amendment, as I say, is such a dulling down of the actual contents that we almost don't get to have that debate now. And I say it dulls it down, but in some ways it also doesn't. The amendment still keeps in the phrase to agree with the principle that the social housing rents system and income support policies should not put tenants in rental stress. That sets anybody who disagrees with that up for a fantastic attack on austerity, on increasing inequality. Because let's be honest, at a principal level, we don't want anyone in our society in rental stress. We don't want anybody to have a hard chance to live on this island. We know there are challenges. So how in the world could anybody disagree with that? I take a challenge with that when we move to the original proposition. And the original proposition opens by defining rental stress. It says rental stress is defined in the Housing Affordability in Jersey 2015 document as where individuals or families spend more than 30% of their gross income on housing costs, leading to financial hardship and instability. So, sir, are we agreeing that the principle that those in social housing should not be put in a position either by lowering rent or increasing income support, that their gross income, no more than 30% of that goes on their housing? Well, we're not, sir, because the Minister, in his amendment in the report, says, well, actually, my amendment therefore proposes a high-level review of the social housing rents policy as a first step, including, understanding the policy intent behind the use of the rental stress calculation, examining its application and relevance in the context of Jersey. So we are agreeing to the principle of a definition of a phrase the Minister wants to review as part of his review. I find that quite hard to understand. So the principle of we do not want rental stress, no. Now, what are we defining that principle by? So this Assembly is united in which way the Minister goes. Well, we're not agreeing that, sir. We are agreeing for the Minister to question that, to understand its applicability. That's quite a dangerous thing. Members may walk away today saying this Assembly believes one thing. We believe that no person should be put in rental stress. And they will all leave perhaps with 49 definitions of what that means until the Minister comes back. And I don't say that lightly, because when we put something down as an in-principle decision, this Assembly quite rightly holds weight to that. And we will be standing here with 49 or maybe 30 or 25 definitions of rental stress and a Minister setting that through review to a principle we've already agreed. That doesn't feel like a good process to me. So that's a challenge. And lastly, the challenge I have is this review may be coming too soon, or if it does, it's missing elements. I highlighted yesterday in an oral question to the Minister the importance of data. The Deputy Kovac rightly highlighted the challenges that Andium had to face, as did other social housing providers, as they purchased land at very low costs, obviously, to reinvest. That building and upscaling the quality of social housing took... Sorry, sir, I'll just pause. I was just getting a little distracted. I'm trying to... no, thank you. Social housing providers have had to invest an awful lot of money. We saw the quantum of that in a written question Deputy Andrews asked, and I think the total liability of borrowing on Andium, and he may nod, is in the region of 400 million across the revolving credit facility, across a private bond, and across the bond and loan from government. That's a significant amount of money. And to an extent, the costs incurred, historic costs, as Deputy Kovac says, aren't there to be fully borne by the renter. But they do have to be borne somewhere. The Minister couldn't give an answer yesterday as to what it costs to build a one-bedroom flat, nor a two-bedroom flat, nor a three-bedroom home. And that might sound that reassuring that he is happy that Andium can provide that assurance to him. But I personally find it quite concerning that we are fundamentally agreeing a definition, well, we're not agreeing a definition, sir, we're agreeing a principle to something we don't have a definition of, when we don't even know what it costs to build a house and the impact that this will have on our housing providers. Are we setting ourselves up for a situation where we fail to invest again because we no longer can invest in that accommodation? Will it go down in quality, and will we see a return to the lower quality accommodation we had and the reason we set up Andium in the first place? Or will it be borne, sir, by the taxpayer? If the Treasury Minister could no longer accept a £30 million dividend, where will she get that money from? Now, Deputy Mezigan is summing up by saying, well, that's a point of a review. I would say, so that's a point of business as usual, working out the machinery of government as to how the Minister for Housing ensures the best provision of social housing in conjunction with his ministers on a daily basis. Lastly, I do want to understand the intent behind amending this, as instead the Minister forging his own path. And I have to say I am reminded to a recent proposition by Deputy War. Deputy War had a principle in mind. His principle was that the asset cap for social rented housing was wrong. He believed it should be different. He proposed within that detail, his detail was, he may remind me, it was 80,000 up to 200,000. He made maybe some omissions in what he proposed. He didn't propose to put them in band 3. They would have fallen anywhere, and there was a slight challenge in that. Now, a minister could read into this, sir, and the minister could say, I see where you're going, it's noble, it's where I want to go too, and I'm going to amend it. I will agree with the principle, and I will bring the minister's tax on top of this and understanding. The minister didn't, sir. The minister voted it down, urged the Assembly to vote it down and say, follow me, I've got a path and it's in train. Did the minister not have this work in train? Are we to expect the minister's been enrolled for 12 months and not done this work? And I really want to know, in his summing up, what was so different between Deputy War's proposition and Deputy Kovac's? Why has he taken a different approach to cooperation versus combat? Because it's important, no matter what this Assembly goes through, and we've been through times, that we do work together, sir. And I want to hear that. If we vote for this amendment, we are ultimately voting, as I say, not just for something that could be read as relatively benign, but something with a huge amount of ambiguity in the air. If we vote against it, we allow Deputy Kovac the floor to sum up and those to speak really against some hard principles. And I think that's a more valuable debate. The Minister will do this work anyway. If we accept the amendment, the debate will be washed through. I reckon 3 or 4 people might speak very lightly because there isn't much substance to talk on other than the ambiguity I mentioned. Let's have a proper debate, sir. I suggest members do not accept this amendment. We hear a full debate. We respect those who speak and value them for bringing these to the Assembly. We vote how we do, and we let the Minister get on with his job. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. Well, the previous speaker raised some interesting points, which I believe can be considered whether we're voting on an amended proposition or not. I'm just going to speak to why it is better amended rather than not amended, in my view. And of course, the Housing Minister can come up with his own justifications. But first of all, Deputy Alex Curtis mentioned the definition of rental stress. I think that is something that needs to be explored because I was thinking about the definition and if we're just looking at the strict percentage of income, I realised that when I was working as a trainee lawyer in London, most of my income did go on rent, but I did have enough to lead a reasonably comfortable lifestyle from what was left over. So the actual percentage itself perhaps isn't really the determinant. So I do think that looking at the principle and what we mean by that and where we can really say are people in rental stress is worth looking at. The other point, and I think we all agree this as a community, we would like Jersey to be affordable for everyone. And when it comes to the rents that are in place or what's going on in this island, some can afford it, some can't. And there's a cost to making it affordable for everybody. What hasn't, and generally when I've tried to bring propositions to try and help people who aren't finding things affordable, particularly pensioners, the policy principle I keep coming across is, well, we don't want to put up pensions for everybody because some people don't need the pensions put up. That's why we have income support. And then we can look at all the individuals and we can decide who really needs some help and who doesn't, and then we can actually manage public finances better. So I think that the merit of the amendment, whether you choose to vote on the amended proposition or not, is that it does invite a more holistic way of a joined-up thinking way whereby the Housing Minister would be consulting with the and working together with the Minister for Social Security, because we already know that some people might not technically be able to afford their rent, but they get income support and therefore they can afford it. And because of our way in which we support people in this community, generally through income support, that's the way it works. Now, I think there are other questions about the whole ANDIM funding mechanism and these things, which, you know, should it be the rate it is at the moment or not, when you bring into account how much housing do we need? All those things need to be considered. But generally, I would suggest to members that they should support the amendment and then perhaps the Housing Minister can, I mean, I think there has been, dare I say, a suggestion of favouritism here, that maybe the Housing Minister has accepted, has worked with this amendment because it's been a fellow party member. He can answer all that, whether the, you know, if this amendment's accepted accordingly in his summing up speech. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Taddeo.
Thank you, sir. I wonder, listening to the speech of Deputy Alex Curtis, whom I normally listen to and enjoy listening to, but always listen to attentively, if we're reading the same amendment, because I don't see anything problematic with the amendment, quite the contrary. In fact, I think the proposition is good, and I think the amendment makes this much better. It allows for much more flexibility. It allows for a much more holistic approach to be taken. And because we're talking on the amendment at the moment, I'd like to say why I think the amendment is better for all of us, not just from a ministerial point of view, but to try and get to the point of maybe understanding the problem that we've got and allowing the minister, and it could be a future minister, of course, the work may not all be done in this term. And again, that is recognised, I think, by this current housing minister. So I think it's really important that income support policies are also taken into account, something which wasn't in the original, but something which I know in conversation with the ministers, been in conversation with the proposer, it absolutely makes sense to make sure that income support policies are taken into account. And why is that? It's because we know that there aren't sufficient resources within the current social housing stock, whether that's in Andium or in the other trusts that provide housing, to support the overwhelming need that there is in Jersey. And we know that the private sector, therefore, has to fulfil a certain social function. And it is income support that pick up the bill. Ultimately, the taxpayer picks up the bill for that through the subsidy that goes ultimately to private landlords. I've yet to receive the actual up-to-date figures, but I know that historically it's always been a figure of around about £10 million of income support money that goes to pay for tenants who are in the private sector. So, of course, the tenants themselves don't keep that money, that goes to the landlords. That's why we talk about £10 million of taxpayers' money going to subsidise private landlords. Do we think that's a good idea? It may be, it may not be, but it's certainly a necessary evil at the moment, and it's something that I think needs to be taken into account in any wholesale review that's going on about rental stress. Because, of course, and I promised a tenant, a St Helier resident who's come to me over the years and highlighted a particular issue, which it was an unfairness, and it was a particularly problematic, especially when the income support components for housing were set at a much lower level than were realistic. So we had this strange situation when Andium a few years ago had this, or income support rather, would cover Andium tenants' rents fully, even if they were above the income support component that would be provided to a private tenant. I hope that makes sense. So, for example, if you're a tenant who's in the private sector, it might be because you're a single man or a single person who's under 65 without a disability, no children. Effectively, social housing will say to you, you're not eligible. You have to go and find somewhere in the private sector. And it may well be that you rent a one-bedroom flat, or more likely a studio apartment, and that your rent could actually be more, it could be the same or less than an Andium property, but actually the Andium property would be fully covered by income support, but if you were in the private sector, it wouldn't be, and that's still the case today. So there are anomalies that need to be taken into consideration, especially if the Minister is to look at areas of rental stress and what that means. Not just applying it to Andium tenants or perhaps even social housing tenants, but actually to those who are latent, who would like to be social housing tenants who are provided for in the market place, so to speak. So I think it's absolutely correct that that is taken into account. I'll just look at some of the other parts and the advantages that are being proposed. So, of course, there's an inclusion here for the Social Security Minister to be included in this, to assess options for a revised social housing rental policy. And why I think that's really important is that, of course, there are lots of iterations that are possible. And the current model that's prevailed up until now was one of 90% of market rates for Andium. I think, is the current policy 80%? I'm not sure, that's where we are now. But of course, the real argument is why are social housing prices being linked to the market at all? Because, of course, we don't have any control over the market. The forces that affect market rents and the vagaries of that don't really necessarily have any meaning to where social rents should be set. And I think that there needs to be a much more flexible approach, or certainly it would be beneficial for any minister, any housing minister, to look at the approaches that social housing could take. And I'll give an example. So, for example, so if somebody is an Andium tenant and they come into a lot of money, what do we do? Do we kick them out? The policy is that no, we don't. We let them stay there, and I think that's probably the right policy. Certainly, if you've got lots of housing stock, you would want to do that. It becomes slightly a problem if somebody's in Andium homes who actually could afford to rent in the private sector. But what you might want to say to them is that we recognise that this has been your home for the last 20 years. Just because your circumstances have changed financially for the better, we're not going to kick you out. We'll allow you to stay, but it may well be that it's appropriate for them to pay a higher rate of rent. It might well be that actually that Andium would want to charge them a market rate on that. So actually, rather than obliging them to have to pay 80% of market rate, you might want to have a means test which would allow in certain circumstances for those tenants to be able to pay 100% of rent, but the trade-off is that they get to keep that property, that home, as Deputy Ward would want me to say, because that's what it is for them. rather than moving out. But it's a trade-off for them, and if they don't like that offer, they could, of course, go and seek something in the private sector. And that additional money, which they can afford to pay, could then go back into cross-subsidise those who might only be able to afford a percentage of their income. And so I think that there's we really should be allowing the Minister and the ministerial team really to look at this in the round, because I think it's more complex than meets the eye. I don't think that any one of us has the answer to solving the issue of rental stress. But the point is that rental stress doesn't just affect those in social housing. It really does affect those in the private rental sector as well, including those who are on income support. But of course, there is a bigger picture out there for those who don't get access to income support, who are paying very high prices for their rentals, and ultimately they will need to be brought into the considerations in the future. So notwithstanding I think the valiant effort from Deputy Alex Curtis, who did ask some valid questions, what about this, what about that? Ultimately, I think this amendment is the right thing to do. It does allow for a more holistic consideration of the issues, and clearly it's also something that is supported by the mover of the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Balash.
Sir, I thought that Deputy Curtis's speech was spot on, if I may say so, and if I may encapsulate what I think he was saying, it is that it's important that we should know what we are voting for, what we are agreeing to when we come to vote on a proposition of this kind. It's very difficult, as Deputy Mezek says, to disagree with the principle that tenants should not suffer rental stress. Who could disagree with that? Of course, there are issues as to what rental stress actually means. I know that there is a definition which has been put in the proposition, but there are others that could be adopted as well. But my problem in particular with the amendment is that it seems to me that the answer lies not in the social housing rental system, which sets a maximum of 80% of market rent. That maximum is important because it underlines fairness as between the social housing sector and the private rental sector. It seems to me the answer to any problem that there might be lies much more in the income support system. But that, unfortunately, is not what the amendment says. The amendment can be divided into two parts. Firstly, it says to agree with the principle that the social housing rent system and income support policies should not put tenants in rental stress. I couldn't disagree with that. And then it goes on and to request the Minister for Housing to assess options for a revised social housing rental policy on the basis of this principle. But that may not be the answer. It may be the answer lies in the income support system, but that's not what we are being asked to agree with this amendment. The other very significant factor, again touched on by Deputy Curtis, is the question of cost. And I have a concern that we are advancing here by stealth. Amendments of this kind, and indeed propositions too, have financial consequences. What will it cost to do what perhaps we wish to achieve? I don't personally want to agree to any principle without knowing what the cost of it is. I hope that doesn't sound too negative. It seems to me that the Housing Minister has an absolute right to conduct a review of the system off his own bat. He doesn't need a resolution of the Assembly to achieve that. He has the power to consider all these issues and to come back to the Assembly with a fully costed proposal, which we can then consider.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And I'm grateful for all speakers ahead of me, and my speech probably will take a minute because of the Minister for Social Security just left the chamber, and if somebody can update her, because there are questions to the Minister for Social Security, and I hope she would be speaking in this debate. So I raised to speak, actually to raise questions based on the speeches. So my first question would be to the Minister of Social Security, what discussion she had with the Minister for Housing, and if it was defined the framework or defined the boundaries of the review of the income support policy that was added to amendment in the proposition. So, for example, has it been discussion that income support policy review in line with the housing would include residents under 5 years? Would this include residents under 10 years who are allowed to work but not allowed to access the houses? Would it include residents that just above the threshold to access social housing, but they're still experiencing, actually, I would think, rental stress in day-to-day? So what I would like to understand, what discussions the Minister for Social Security had with the Minister for Housing when it was proposed review of the income support policies. What would form part, what will be the reference of this review? And another question that I have, and I would like to understand from the Minister in his closing speech, what's the difference between, in his view, why he amended what was clear for me, intention of the Deputy Kovac to have endorsement by the Assembly in 2026, and if I interpret it correct, we will have a debate and we can amend and we can make a decision of the Assembly. When in my interpretation, endorsement by 2026, compared to options will be presented to the Assembly. Would it present it as a report, and if somebody will pick up, or would it be debate in why it was important to amend this part, and if Minister envisage actually changes coming from January 27. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Miller.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I rise to speak in support of the Minister for Housing's amendment. I will be honest, I would not support this proposition if it was not amended. I would find it very, very difficult, and I've discussed this with the Minister, I would find it very difficult to agree to a matter of principle without fully understanding the implications and the impacts and the consequences intended and unintended of doing so. And we have to bear in mind that this proposition does not just affect Andium, it affects all of our other social housing providers, and it will also affect the parishes to the extent they have social housing on their books that they make available to parishioners. The Minister has emphasised the complexity of a review that by necessity will require looking at both the income support regime, which is very sophisticated in its operation, and the social rent policy. It is worth reminding ourselves that the previous such review that resulted in the incorporation of Andium homes took several years. Deputy Taddy has also commented on the complexities of this question. Therefore, as a consequence, however well-intentioned Deputy Kovac's proposition may be, the timelines within it would be unachievable, is my understanding. I'm assured by the Minister for Housing that a preliminary review of options will be achievable within the timeframe specified in his amendment. I'm further assured by the Minister that what will return to this Assembly will be no more than options, and that may provide guidance to future Assembly and will not bind that assembly. It is a discussion for another date. It is worth putting on record my concerns that in reviewing options, we should not approve anything that will negatively impact the business models of Andium or the other social housing providers, including the parishes. We need them to maintain their homes to the decent home standards by comprehensive maintenance programmes, and in the case of Andium, we want them to continue their capital development programme. Deputy Curtis and in fact Deputy Mayor yesterday both commented on Andium's £400 million of borrowing. That is the case. I am confident that that can be repaid, but we must ensure that it is repaid. We must consider the implications for Andium carefully, and I would expect that their board will almost certainly be required to put repayment of debt above new building and maintenance if it came to that decision. So the impact on Andium is very important. I've also discussed with the Minister that I would find it impossible to approve anything that required Andium and other social housing providers to undertake means testing in order to assess rental stress. That is the job of income support, and they have the mechanisms and the staff and the systems to do that. If social housing providers were asked to look at means testing, it would make them more inefficient and significantly increase their costs. In any event, in my view, rent should follow the nature and the value of the property and not the means of the tenant. I think there are issues in doing that. These are some of my thoughts that will come forward in the final debate. At various points in my life, I heard people saying things like, in the UK, well, I could get a new job, but that will take me into the higher tax bracket, so it's not worth my while, so I'm not going to try and get a better job. Over here, I've heard people say, well, I could apply for a better job at a managerial grade, but then I won't get overtime. It's not worth my while. And I think there is a risk here that by tying rents to income, we have people saying, well, I could get a new job, but my rent will go up, so I'm not going to bother. There are numerous issues that have to be considered here. So that is the reason why I support the Minister's amendment, because I could not support the proposition. So since we are discussing a review to determine potential options, one of which could, of course, be to retain the status quo, I would urge members to support the proposition as amended. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. I think once again we're indebted to Deputy Alex Curtis for bringing up some very important issues. The nub of the issue for me is that the Minister is actually free to do everything in this amendment anyway. He doesn't need our permission.
Whose device was that? The loud noise it made. Any volunteers? We must be careful to have our machines on silent at all times, I think. It's distracting for speakers. Yes, Deputy.
I don't think he needs our permission to review the rental policy. And if this amendment is defeated, he can still get on and do everything that's in the amendment. The Assembly cannot take away the Minister's duties as a Minister. He can still, and the amendment says, assess options for a revised social housing rental policy. That is surely something that the Housing Minister is empowered to do, regardless of whether this amendment is passed or not. And he can do that in line with whatever view he wishes to take about rental stress and the wider issues around the rental market and Andium's viability. It was interesting to hear Deputy Miller's argument that she cannot, the reason she wants to support this amendment is because she cannot support the original proposition. That makes it feel to me like this amendment is a little sort of fudge to enable the Council of Ministers to unite behind something. And it rather reinforces the point made by Deputy Alex Curtis that the original proposition has been stripped of all meaning in order to create an acceptable compromise. There is nothing of great substance in this amendment. And the only reason it seems to be supported by the government is because it does very little. The reason to vote against this amendment, and this I think is the absolutely key point, the reason to vote against this amendment is to force a debate on the original proposition, which is a much more substantive, much more interesting, much more significant, possibly more controversial proposition, but nevertheless involves some very meaty issues. So I think we can have our cake and eat it. The housing minister can do what he wants to do, and we can have a debate about the much more substantive issues in the original proposition. And I think that would be a reasonable reason for voting against this amendment and pursuing the original proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. It's just really to ask a question if the Minister might respond in his summing up. It was just, the Minister in his report says that he will bring policy options for the Assembly's careful consideration and endorsement by January 2026. And whilst I appreciate that can be done through a report, when it comes to actual debate and voting in the Assembly, we can't, as I understand it, really vote on options in the Assembly. We can only vote on one thing and then a yes or a no. So to me, I can't see how the Assembly can vote on options, be presented with options in that way. And so I'd be very pleased if the Minister could explain how he plans to present options to be voted upon by the Assembly. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir, and I'm pleased to follow Deputy Morell because that's one of the questions on my list too. And I do have a number of questions that I really hope that the Minister can respond to at the end. I do hope he's got a pen. There's quite a few questions going on here. But I would just start with a comment first that I'm actually really pleased that we're back to calling a spade, and we've got a review called a review rather than an evaluation. But now on to the questions. My first one is similar to Deputy Morell's one, and I'd like to know how the Minister envisages bringing those options back and whether they are options that the Assembly can choose to, say, A, B, C, for example. I'd also like to know whether the existing system, whether he envisages the existing system as being one of the options. And also whether it comes with a commitment to engage with members ahead of any such debate, because I think something like this, if we are then going to be voting on options or even a single option, I think it's a duty of everyone in this Assembly to really put some hard work into properly understanding it, because it's a very big area of work. Which I think brings me on to my final question, which is around the comments made about resourcing of this piece of work. And the amendment states that there's no need for extra resources and it will be undertaken from within existing capacity, time and staff like. And I'd just like to understand from the Minister a little bit more about how that's possible. And does it link to there's a comment in the report that accompanies the amendment, and if no one minds, I'll read it. It says, "It should be noted that this review is consistent with the commitment of the Council of Ministers has made within the Common Strategic Policy 2024-2026 to review the social housing rents policy." So my final three questions, sir, are to the Housing Minister. Has work on that CSP commitment started? And at what stage is it, if it has started? And if it hasn't started, why hasn't it started? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I also celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the founding of Andium. It was such a good day to remove the responsibilities of the Housing Minister for what we used to call in this Assembly, sir, the dripping tap. Just as the Health Minister is making proposals that he is a policy individual, not simply running the executive, so we were trying to, in those days, to put a policy minister, because we knew that housing was so important. Because, sir, housing stress has been a stressful issue for generations, decades of islanders. And so we thought what we were doing by separating and putting Andium into a separate entity, having a board, and I think we can all salute and commend the work that Andium have been doing in terms of not only dealing with the prejudice of you used to live in estates, ours, sir, and that was in the accent of a well-esteemed member who I joined. It was pejorative, but now we don't have that, and that is a system which is really good. Andium have delivered effectively equality and fairness in terms of what they deliver. But there's been a flaw, sir, since the start of this, and this goes to the heart of the amendment of why I am really quite, I don't know, I think I was flabbergasted, then I was surprised, and now I'm confused as to what the Housing Minister's actually doing here. And this has been, and I also thank very much Deputy Alex Curtis and the other members, Deputy Balash and Deputy Renner, from asking. Because really, what are we doing here? We've got a Housing Minister that's supposed to be responsible for policy. Now, I'd like to remind the Housing Minister that in the last 10 years, since the creation of Andium, the private sector rental rent, because I think what's being driven at here is really, and the Minister can say whether or not he's really after this, is it really a stealth proposition to bring down the percentage of the social rented, of the social rents that social renter pays by income support? Is that really, I suspect that's where we're heading. I suspect that the problem is, sir, is that the Minister didn't like the 90%, he didn't like the 80%, and now they've got problems with people with stress on 70%. And I agree. There is a problem. There may well be a problem with private sector rents having increased since those days of Andium 10 years ago by 50%. In the last 5 years, rentals have risen by 25%. Even after adjusting for inflation, that means that increases in rentals have been 10 to 12% more in real terms. That's a burden. I understand why people are in stress. But of course, it's not only housing stress. As we discussed yesterday in this assembly, it's the cost of living. And basically, there are people in housing that are in more stress because of their circumstances. Just to make this absolutely clear about what we're dealing with, in 2019, the average rental for a two-bedroom flat was about £1,400. Now, today, the figure is £1,750. That's an increase of £350 a month. That's more than £4,000 a year. For a three-bedroom house, the typical rent 5 years ago, just 5 years ago, was £1,850. Now it's £2,300, an increase of £500. Wages haven't gone up by that much, no matter what income and other earnings are. That's equivalent to a second car. That's equivalent to a term school fees. That's equivalent to making difference between making ends meet and going into debt for other families. And so what the real debate is, which I think is what members want, is what's driving this? What's driving the stress? Have we actually had a debate about what driving this stress is about? Can we simply carry on passing money, public money, because I think this is where the policy is going, because we've got reform, which I fully accept, they're in government, they're kind of in the majority government, sir. We've got the housing minister and social security minister and a backbencher, well-intentioned. My good deputy friend from St Saviour is seeing the people in rental stress and in other stress that we're seeing. But what are we tackling? Are we just going to simply allow this almost elephant in the room of why rentals are going up and not say why families are struggling? I know why. I think we all know why. It's because the Bridging Island plan didn't put enough supply. When we originally put housing amendment, Andium rents in place, I think it was the Treasury Minister, Deputy Gorse was the Chief Minister, we put 90%. We put the right checks and balances in place so we would get the Housing Minister to deliver on the big portfolio of making sure that we not only had the supply, but we also had all the mechanisms in place to provide a whole range of tenures of accommodation, not just social renting. The ability to have affordable homes to buy, first-time buyers, downsize homes, identifying, as Deputy Ward did the other day, those hidden households of those older people who we'd forgotten, and I commend Deputy Ward for doing that. What's the Housing Minister up to, sir? Is he actually going to come forward with a proposal to bring forward a 70% increase and get his friend, the Social Security Minister, to come forward and then use the Treasury Minister, who's not in the Assembly, but is clearly very concerned about this? So if we basically move down, if the policy option that's going to come out of this is going to come to 80% to 70%, that's going to cost taxpayers £7.35 million a year. That's £7.35 million a year on income support additional budget. I've worked it out. If the Minister wants to correct it, I'd like to know. So that's basically 3,500 social rented units. I've worked that out on the basis of those increase in supply on that basic £1,750 per rent. Now, I thought what we'd done with income support is we got away from subsidising in a disjointed way. We were bringing all income support, just as they've tried with the UK, they followed us actually, with universal credit, a one-stop shop for assessing need. And income support was supposed to be that one-stop shop. So what we wouldn't be doing is we would be subsidising housing in that box, but we would then be giving people income support. It was the big reform of welfare, I would remind the constables, which saved them quite a lot of money. It was basically the reform of welfare. And what we were trying to do was basically make sure that the market for social rented housing, for private sector housing, for lodging accommodation, for purchase, first-time buyers was going to work. But the Housing Minister in recent months has basically said that actually he doesn't want to have a private sector rental market.
Did not say that.
But I don't think I'm entitled to be interrupted, sir. I think
wait for your
yeah,
speech,
exactly.
of course.
So I'm quite clear that the Minister is no particular fan of the private sector rental market. Certainly that's an impression I've got. If he'd like to correct the record, then I'd be very pleased for him to do so. But all the evidence is that basically we're seeing a growing number of social rented properties. I've described in another speech, sir, and he didn't disagree, and members have basically started now understanding the consequences of effectively creating a larger and larger social renting housing stock. If we continue to create just simply a social rented housing provision without a private sector rental arrangements, then we're going to create more and more money. So that's more and more revenue money for income support, and because we're going to have to subsidise. So the market is being increased in rents. Well, of course, markets will increase when you put things like the surcharge on. I know members don't agree with it, but if you create the disincentive to get private sector investment into private sector rentals, then you basically create only the social rented housing provisions. I don't know of a single rental property or a single construction of a private sector rental accommodation that's been built recently that's actually funded. I'm really worried about it. I know that there is social housing provision, but I'm not sure that there's anything in the private sector rental market that's coming, because why would you, when you've basically got the surcharge? And there's great worry, sir, about the future rental plan. I know that that's going to be debated, but I know that there is the private sector rental market, which is a market. Whether we like it or not, there's 10% of islanders that are in the private sector rental market. It's not just about social renting. It's not just about them. It's about others as well. And what about all those non-qualified people? They're in terrible stress, sir. I know I've got example after example in my own constituency of people in non-qualified. I can see the Treasury Minister nodding. Maybe they're in her constituency too, and she certainly sees them. But they will be, and I make no joke about it. It's absolutely problematic. £600 a month, sir, we're being asking our migrant workers to pay per month for their non-qualified accommodation. We've got stress in all parts of the market because the market isn't working. So the problem with some policies is eventually you run out of other people's money. And that's what I think is happening. I think we're creeping towards basically shoveling more money in income support by going towards a 70% rental thing. We're going to create more and more subsidies for Andium to build more and more homes, and we're crowding out the private sector rental market. And actually, our esteemed planning panel and our esteemed Environment Minister has got a Bridging Island plan which actually failed to deliver the right levels of supply. I know there's some fantastic development. I commend the Constable of St John's with his Zion development. I went to go and see it the other day. Fantastic. But there's not enough social rented 3-bedroom houses. In fact, Andium sold off more than they've created. I know because I've checked every single record on confidential.je. There's been more in my constituency and in my good friend from St Clement's. There's been more 3-bedroom social rented houses sold off by Andium than they've been created. This is not the way to run a country, sir, and it's not the way to run a housing market. And I'm sceptical about this proposition. I'm sceptical because it doesn't deal with the real supply side issues. We still haven't dealt with the Bridging Island plan, having failed to deliver hundreds of units of accommodation. The reasons are well known. I know the Planning Minister is doing some work about it. The private sector rental increase continues to rise. Nobody's asking the reason why. It's because the market's not working. Because the market's not working because of the fear, because of the surcharge. Nobody's investing in private sector rentals. Have we had a debate about why rents are rising? Have we? I don't think so, sir. I say, if we're going to help social renters with their stress, let's do it with our eyes wide open. Let's do it with our eyes wide open, and let's also think about those people who are in private sector rentals. Let's speak about those people who are in non-qualified accommodation. Let's speak about all those people that want to sell their houses, but they can't. They want to downsize. There's lots of downsizers, but the market, in terms of its purchase, is not working. The market's not working, sir. So actually, what I'd like to do is I'd like to suggest, because I asked in the start of this, sir, I asked whether this is a government proposition. It now seems it is. The Treasury Minister's nervous. She should be, because I think she knows what's coming in terms of the 70%. I think the only thing to do, sir, is a reference back. Reference it back to the Minister to come forward with some of his proposals, so we're not going to do anything by stealth. So I would like to say, on the basis that this is now a government amendment, which is asking to do what some of us think they should do anyway, I think we should have a reference back, sir, to the Council of Ministers, asking what the cost implications are of what could come for something that we don't do, so we don't have a situation that we're doing things without our knowledge. And so on the basis, sir, that we need more information, what is the cost of, for example, removing the rental burden to 70%? How is that going to be paid for? And I'd like more information on the other people who are suffering stress in terms of the private sector rental market and the lodging. And I think those are good questions because we represent everybody in Jersey, and I think the Council of Ministers shouldn't be I'm not suggesting that they're playing games with us, but I think they should be absolutely transparent in clearing it. I've heard one minister just now asking a question about something that I assume that the Council of Ministers is a collective of. The Council of Ministers, I understand the nervousness of the Treasury Minister, Economic Development Minister didn't know what he was doing. I think I'm perfectly in my rights to ask, can we have a reflection back, and can the Council of Ministers come back with a proper set of options, which is, I think, the Housing Minister's job anyway. And on that basis, we can have a constructive discussion on the facts, because the Council Ministers need to do some more homework.
Are you proposing a reference back?
Yes, that's my reference back, sir.
Sir, point of order, please.
Point of order from Deputy Scott, yes.
If there's a reference back of this amendment, then surely we are left with the main proposition alone. I just would like to understand what would be the consequences if we referred back an amendment to the Housing Minister and we still have the main proposition left.
basis.
Deputy, I'm slightly concerned about your suggestion of a reference back because, of course, Standing Order 83 refers to reference back of a proposition, so that would be, in effect, a reference back to Deputy Kovac, whose proposition this was.
It's now basically, I realise the uncertainty and I don't wish to cause any difficulty. The fact is that we don't have enough information in order to, I was trying to find a polite way of dealing with the lack of information.
You could, under Standing Order 79, ask for suspension of the debate for the purpose of scrutiny of the proposition.
I'd like the Council of Ministers to come back with more information on the financial implications of what the options could be for dealing with this rental stress and covering the other issues, which I know another members have wish to do. Because effectively we are at risk of agreeing something, which then we will come forward and then be told that we've agreed something and then be further surprised at the cost of it. And I think that the members are entitled, if this is a government amendment, which I think it is, I think we're entitled to have estimates of cost.
But the proposition is a proposition of Deputy Kovac.
But it's become a government amendment proposition, sir.
Well, you're dealing with the amendment. The amendment's not been accepted by the Assembly.
Well, do I do a reference back on the basis of accepting the amendment then? Because it just is not fair to members to agree something without the full financial implications. So if I'm not in order at this stage, sir, I'll do it at that stage, sir. I'll do that, sir.
Well, I don't think it's in order at the moment, and it may not be in order then. Well, it may be in order then, but it would simply be a reference back to Deputy Kovac, whose proposition this is.
It seems that Deputy Kovac is being inadvertently used as a mechanism for the Housing Minister to achieve something. And I want to just be clear about it.
Sir, can I raise a point of order? He's clearly imputed improper motives on me, and what he said is completely false. That is against the standing orders of the Assembly, sir.
Take one thing at a time. You weren't imputing any proper motives.
Not at all, sir. I think it's fine that they operate as they do, sir. It's fine. But we just need to be clear about it.
So can I ask for point of order, is it in order to refer a proposition? I mean, we shouldn't be dealing with this now at all, is the first point. You can't refer back an amendment.
My current view is it's not in order to attempt to refer this proposition back to the amender because he's not the proposer of the proposition.
And so is it any way possible to refer back to I thought we had to refer back to a minister or to a committee. You don't refer back to a private member.
Well, it's an unusual situation. It's not one we've come across before, but the...
Sir,
I'll make matters easy for you, sir. Thank you for ruling. I'm grateful for that. I withdraw my proposition to refer further because that's understanding order. I thought it was helpful to do that. But if you can't basically refer that, then the right thing to do is when the proposition is hopefully as amended, I will agree with the amendment brought by the Housing Minister, but I think before we agree it, what we need to make the Council of Ministers come back with the financial implications, which is the right thing to do at that stage. So I will sit down, sir, and thank members for their time. I hope that I've elucidated some of the issues that are important and underlying this issue, and that we don't have effectively a creeping approval process of something that we should then put our Treasury Minister and our public finances in difficulty. And I think it's important to have the overall debate, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Minister, your light was on briefly. Did you want to make a point of order? Or was the moment
No,
passed?
thank you, sir. Not following the Deputy's withdrawal of his proposition.
Yes. The next member to speak is Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's very interesting. I'm so pleased, and I think there'll be so many people out there who are struggling on this island that are glad to see so many members of the Assembly who suddenly have an awareness of rental stress and the difficulties people are facing in their rents. It's as if there's an election coming. I don't know. I want to start off, sir, by saying that I know Deputy Kovac, and I've worked with her for a number of years and went for an election campaign, and there is nobody more principled, I think, in this Assembly, even myself, who can be a little over-principled at times, than Deputy Kovac. And there is absolutely no way that you can browbeat Deputy Kovac in anything at all. I know, I've tried it, and it does not work. And when we disagree for the right reasons. And as a member of this Assembly, she sticks to her guns and she works incredibly hard to not only represent her constituents and her beliefs, but also to bring forward pieces of proposition. And in this case, in accepting this amendment, the acceptance was there because she believed it was the right thing to do. That's the reason it was accepted, because it's the right thing to do. And I think all the people can do in this Assembly is question that underlying principle, we're in a very difficult position. So let's move on from that, sir. Let's look at what the amendment actually says. Because I think what we've got here is a debate that will try to undermine the amendment so that we can get onto the main proposition, and then members can vote against that and criticise it and say that actually that cannot be done. The word nihilism, sir, sprang to mind. And I think we need to move forward. And I recognise, sir, I am absolutely in recognition of the fact that a number of people in this Assembly have a problem with reform being anywhere in the government, and have a reform with some members of reform even being in the Assembly. That's fine. That's politics, sir. That's the way politics goes. And that's okay. But let's talk about what's actually happening here. Because the amendment added in the Social Security Minister, because Social Security is such an intrinsic part of the way we run our social housing, and because so many people, well, no, that's wrong, because people are involved in the social security system and social housing. So if we are going to review rents and look at the way in which we can remove people from rental stress, and I'm glad that everybody agrees that we should be removing people from rental stress, and we can go through the navel-gazing of what's the detail in what that means, because we can't do anything with it because we don't know the detail of what that means. Then we spent years doing that. So we take a definition of rental stress and we say that one works, and we are not going to have people on this island in rental stress because we think their lives should be better. It's great that we all agreed on that now. Fantastic. What a step forward we've moved today. Marvellous. How are we actually going to do this? Well, sir, it has been said in so many ways, and it's a very strange debate that we've had actually, talking about Andean borrowing, so we need to sort out the costing of this, and so the Treasury Minister is involved. We need to sort out the role of Social Security and whether it's successful or not, and where is the money going from Social Security, both private and Andean tenants. Yes, absolutely right. So the amendment brings in the Social Security Minister, the right thing to do. It then says we will the housing minister, who is not the shareholder for Andean, by the way, that's the Treasury Minister, who has much more control over what Andean Homes does in terms of costs, to present options to the Assembly in January 2026. So it's quite a quick piece of work that can be done in-house, because I think the Housing Department know an enormous about housing. Certainly this Housing Department does, about Andean Homes. And then to inform future decisions of the Assembly. And that's a really important time. That's a really important time to do that. To say these are the decisions that we want to make. Are we going to make these decisions? Because what we're going to have if we don't accept this amendment, is a debate around the main proposition to say, we can't possibly do that now, it's too quick and it's too expensive, we don't know the implications. We wouldn't understand what's going to go on if we do that. But the amendment that says, okay, well, let's look at that properly and let's involve all the ministers that are involved with this and produce something for this assembly and come back and say, these are the decisions, here we go, this is what we need to be doing, these are the possibilities of doing this. If, as we've all agreed, that we don't want people in rental stress, marvellous, well done to the assembly for that. I thank everybody for that because we're all on the same platform there, marvellous. I was going to say you're all on a reform platform, but I don't want to infuriate people, I'm only joking. We're all on the platform of not wanting people on rental stress. How are we going to do that? And it'll be interesting to see how many people, if they don't vote for the amendment, then speak against the main proposition and then vote against the main proposition, because that's too difficult to do as well. Because we can search around for reasons why that can't quite be done, because this isn't precise enough or that can't be done. So what the amendment does, as was said, and I just want to make sure, to agree with the principle, we agree with the principle, that's marvellous, we can agree with that, social housing rents and income support policies should not put tenants in rental stress. That, to me, is why this amendment is very important. I believe that's the reason why Deputy Kovacs also saw the importance of it, because Deputy Kovacs knows a lot about income support, she used to work there for years and actually understands it. And so that would be one of the reasons why that's an important amendment to this proposition. It has improved it. Should not be and request the Minister for Housing, in consultation with the Minister for Treasury Resources and Minister for Social Security, ministers working together around Council of Ministers. They may not have the same political underlying beliefs, but they need to work together to get something done. Otherwise, we'll come to the Assembly and things will be lost and we'll get nowhere. So we've worked together in consultation to assess the options for revised social housing rental policy. What are the genuine options that we can actually do, that can actually be done? In the next election, we can all talk about the options that we want to have. They're wonderful. We can go out to the electorate and say, this is the way it should be done. You can have as many ideas as you want. That's great. Do it. It's my advice. Go to the electorate, be honest with them. Form a party. Not a pseudo-party, a party. And then work together and give a real option, a vision for the electorate about how you're going to remove rental stress. That's the important thing to do. And present these options to the Assembly, come back to the Assembly in January 26, have the debate then to inform future decision making. Then the Minister can go away and say, okay, we've done all the work, here we are. We've given the decisions by the Assembly, we've got support of the Assembly, we can put these in place for the next Assembly because this Assembly was certain on what we're doing. So this amendment not only makes sense, it's a way forward, we actually might make a step forward, and I have to say, I'm afraid, the cat was let out of the bag when Deputy Joseph talked about his issues over what he believes is going to happen because of this. So I recognise there may be a lack of trust. A lack of trust that actually going through options and coming something to the Assembly might come through different options. The idea is that the decision has already been made and this is just a smokescreen. So we're in a wonderful catch-22 situation. If you don't consult and come back to us, we won't listen to you. But if you do that, you're not listening to us. Which is it? You can't have both. So, to finish, sir, the original proposition by Deputy Kovacs was based upon the strong principles and political principles that she has. She came to speak to the Minister, improved it with reference to income support because there's an understanding of income support policies, to include the Social Security Minister so that a genuine outcome could be brought back to this Assembly that might actually work. That's where the amendment is going. It is not about doing some sort of deal because you're in the same party. You could not be further from the truth there. I know that because I'm a Deputy Kovacs on the other side of something and it was really quite tough, but we got through it in the end and we worked together, and that's okay because that's what happens when you've got principles. So I would urge the Assembly to support the amendment because the work will be done. We can include everyone. It will come back in January. You can have the debate in January. We can go through the genuine options then, which have been thought through and costed, etc., etc., etc. And then we can all talk about how we're going to relieve rental stress and remove it from people, and underlying that is the message that people in Jersey want, that this Assembly actually wants to remove rental stress in the best way possible so that they have better lives and they're not living your life simply to pay your rent and get through to the next week or month. So I urge members to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy.
Sir, would the member give way for a point of clarification? Thank you, Noel. I really appreciate him. It was early in his speech, but I wish to wait until the end. The Minister remarked that we all agreed on the definition of rental stress and that it had been long agreed as to what the definition. I just wondered if he could clarify which definition. If there was one that we had agreed. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think I said we agreed on the definition. I said I think we agreed on the principle that we need to remove rental stress. And if I did say definition, I shouldn't have said that because I recognise that. I did also say, sir, just for real clarification, that at some point you have to choose a definition of rental stress and you have to work with it. Yeah.
I thank the Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Conatable Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I just rise to say that I will be supporting the amendment because I found myself in great difficulty in supporting the original proposition if it had been unamended. And I do that, support the amendment, because I am encouraged that the Minister is going to go away and do a review. And I would ask him that when he's doing that review, would he also consider the many members of our society, young families, who are also in mortgage stress. They're paying their taxes, raising their families, and they get very or little, no support from the state in doing so. So really, I'm looking for a balance and fairness across the piece in society. And as has been suggested, we're coming up towards an election, and I certainly won't be restanding, and I'm sure there's nobody here who doesn't actually know that already. I would say that socialism is a very laudable principle, but in actual fact, it only works until you run out of other people's money to spend. So in doing that review, please consider the whole of our population and those people who are also struggling to pay their mortgages as well as pay their rent. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conatable. Chief Minister.
Oh, thank you, sir. I'm pleased to follow the last speaker because I think he wisely elucidated why we should support this, and quite rightly he pointed out rental stress is not only the only type of stress that islanders face when related with housing. We all know that one of our biggest challenges is the cost of housing and the cost of homes for pretty much all islanders. Even if islanders aren't under financial stress, it's still a big consideration. And actually this amendment commits the government, the Minister and this Assembly to absolutely nothing. Actually what it is doing is making sure we get on with the work that was promised as part of the CSP. We perhaps accelerate that work and produce a view. There's one or two of us getting a little bit excited about it, sir. But just to be clear, the proposition requests the Minister for Housing, in consultation with the Minister for Treasury and Resources and Social Security, to bring forward revised social housing rents policy on the basis of this principle for the States Assembly endorsement by 2027. Now that is just not possible with the best will in the world. We cannot achieve that. So, and I'm going to read the amendment out, the Housing Minister, after discussions with other ministers, is bringing forward an amendment which reads to agree with the principle that the social housing rent system and income support policies should not put tenants in rental stress. Should not put tenants in rental stress. I'm sure we all agree with that as a high level principle, because we all wait for the Deputy of St Mary to Constable of St Mary to finish. It's okay, sir.
Your understanding orders, one can converse, but not converse noisily. So it's important not to distract speakers. Thank you. Yes, Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Should not put tenants in rental stress, and I'm sure that's a high-level principle with which we all agree if we are serious about bearing down on housing costs for all islanders, and to request the Minister for Housing, in consultation with the other relevant ministers, to assess options for a revised social housing rental policy on the basis of this principle, and to present those options to the Assembly by January 2026 to inform future decisions of the Assembly, Now, I understand from the Minister that that piece of work will be presented to the States as an R with options for consideration to address aspects of the cost of housing, in this instance, as the cost of rental housing provided by Andium Homes. I want to reiterate it would not be possible for a comprehensive new social housing rents policy and fundamental review of the income support system to align with the new model in the timescales proposed by Deputy Kovac. If the Assembly approves the amendment, the Minister for Housing is proposing to undertake a clearly scoped review of the social housing rents policy and to bring those options by 2026 in an R. I'm repeating it again because it's important. And those options will be set out as an R in a report for consideration. And I think that's important. I agree with Deputy Balash. We wouldn't expect this Assembly to make big policy decisions without considering all sorts of different options and costings and understanding them fully. And that's what this report will do. It will provide that information to help either this Assembly and future Assemblies. It will require very careful consideration to ensure we arrive at a model that not just in housing policy terms also addresses the sustainability of social housing provision and our income support system, which are intrinsically linked. The Minister, I know this, sir, and people are throwing words around such as socialism, one thing and another. Some bits of socialism are quite good. Not many, but one or two bits. And I'm disappointed that Deputy Ozef made a reference to the fact that this was some sort of a secret pact between members of the Reform, non-ministerial, and party members of the Reform Party to slide something through the government, past the government and the Assembly. Simply not true, and very disappointing that kind of accusation should be made. The Housing Minister recognises concern amongst state members that the current social housing rents policy could place social housing tenants in rental stress. Importantly, the review must assess how any changes to the current social housing rents policy could be made without creating financial uncertainty for Andium Homes and the housing trusts. It is vital that their financial sustainability of our social housing, of them and all of our social housing providers, and their ability to invest in homes is and will be placed at the centre of the review and the decision-making process for any Assembly moving forward. Because without that, we will have an unsustainable model. And if we look back to where we were 20 years ago, and the improvement since Andium have taken over 10 years ago, we will see that we've been moving in the right direction. But we cannot ignore the cost of housing stress that islanders, the majority of islanders, are facing, and this is an important piece of that work. Now, in relation to the amendment, of course, I'm not sure if the Assembly has noticed, but we are, at Council of Ministers, a broad church of political views, and we try and work where possible. It's not always possible, but where possible, collaboratively, not just across the Council of Ministers table, but with members of this Assembly. And we will always try and find practical solutions moving forward, and that's exactly what we've tried to do with Deputy Kovac in this proposition, and I thank her for her discussions with the Housing Minister and for accepting it, because that is a practical way forward, as the Constable of Trinity alluded to. So I ask members and urge members, please, in the interests of getting things done, because not only as a Council of Ministers do I think we have a responsibility to work collaboratively, I think in the interests of islanders, this Assembly should occasionally accept reasonable compromises and in the interest of getting things done. If we accept the amendment, the government will then move forward, piece of work led by the Housing Minister, presenting to a report no later than January 2026, which lays out all of the relevant options and important information which will enable this Assembly to make future decisions, to make the right decision in the future. Ironically, we could all vote against everything and the Minister could still do that anyway. So let's work collaboratively, support the amendment and get this done so we can get on with the work. Thank you, sir.
Sir, can I ask a point of clarification?
You're prepared to accept a point of clarification? Yes.
So if I heard correctly at the end, the Chief Minister said that even if this amendment was defeated, the Minister would be able to do all the work that he currently wishes to do in this area. Can he confirm that this is the case?
Chief Minister.
Well, sir, I think I was just repeating the words Deputy said earlier on, but practically, sir, maybe I should. So I think if the Assembly, technically that might be possible, but I think it would be unwise to do that work if the Assembly were to reject an amendment which asked him to do it, then he ignored that decision and went on to do it. So technically he probably could, sir, but I think in practice it wouldn't happen. And this review that is badly needed would be curtailed. Thank you.
Sir, can I ask a further point of clarification?
On the point? Yes,
Thank you.
Stevenson.
Just clarification on that last point, does the Chief Minister believe a decision on this amendment would then override a decision on the CSP, which contained that commitment to it? Thank you, sir.
Chief Minister.
I think perhaps a bigger piece of work in relation to housing costs could be carried out, but that's a discussion I need to have with the Housing Minister. But I think potentially the government and the Minister, I certainly would be uncomfortable, although we have agreed it in a previous CSP last year. This is a later decision. If we make a decision on an amendment which asks the Housing Minister not to produce a review with options, then I think that we'd be unlikely to do that. But again, that's a discussion we'd have to have within the government, sir.
Thank you. Deputy Feltham.
Thank you, sir. I'm pleased to speak after the Chief Minister and hope that I can provide some further clarity. I'm minded to answer the question that Deputy Gardner asked earlier around the conversations that I had as Social Security Minister with the Housing Minister and Treasury Minister in agreeing this particular amendment. From my perspective, this does do something important, the amended version of the proposition. What it does is it shows commitment from this Assembly to a point of principle. That very clearly then guides the work of officers as they then do the work as was planned within the Common Strategic Policy. To answer Deputy Gardner's question about some of the thought process behind this amendment, as a former civil servant, I do look at processes and think pragmatically around what can be achieved and what's the best way of achieving it. In my view, it is absolutely the role of this Assembly to be the leaders and to approve in principle things like our social rent system and income support policy shouldn't be putting people in rental stress, and be setting that direction then for civil servants to follow in their work. The timing of the report to the Assembly, and we had discussions around this, I think it is timely because in January 2026, I'm minded that by mid that year, there will be a new common strategic policy. So for me, the importance of this review as well is to inform the next Assembly as it develops its common strategic policy and give it the backing and information that it needs to make the right decisions at that time. And then, of course, inform future budget decisions. The unamended version did leave out reference to income support, which is a really important and vital component of our system at the moment and how we manage rental stress and support for people on low incomes. What the amended version also enables us to do, I think, is consider have we got that balance right? I'm always very conscious that we've got a group of people just on the cusp that don't meet the requirements for income support. So how does the current system and process and policies suit those people, and are they in rental stress? I was interested to hear the Constable of Trinity. We have different politics, but I was pleased that he took a sensible view of this amendment and sees why the amendment's important. And I think that pragmatic view actually transcends politics, and it is why we're here. So I was pleased to see him take that view on the amendment. I think that the amended version if adopted, will put us in a really good place as an Assembly. It will show that we as an Assembly are committed to affordable social housing rental policies. And let's remind ourselves that it's not just Andium that provides social rented housing. It is a really complex landscape. But it's not just people that are on income support that we are looking at. It gives me, as Social Security Minister, the opportunity to look at, have we got that balance right? So I do hope that members support this amendment as supported by the original mover of the proposition, and I think that's important to note as well. I think the amendment gets us to a place where we will be able to deliver something that will inform future work and put the next Assembly in the very best place to have the very best policies into the future. Just as a note on the original proposition, when I was speaking to Deputy Kovacs, and I know that she thinks very much about what she does and was moved by the conversations that she has on the doorstep, and I'm sure we all have, when people say to us, oh, well, why can't we go back to the system we used to have? Of course, that system preceded income support. We are in a different income support landscape now, and that needs to be brought into this piece of work as well. So I urge members to support this amendment. It is supported by the mover of the proposition, and then I urge members to support the amended proposition when it comes to the final vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendments? Deputy Cost.
Thank you, sir. It's 10 years since Andium was created, as the then Treasury Minister reminded us. And if we step back from a purely should we review government policy that's been in place for 10 years, then a sensible answer to that question is yes, it would benefit from a review, because we should always check and adjust the implementation of government policies and just not assume that they are working. Having said that, of course, I think the creation of Andium is probably one of Jersey's government's most successful policies. As I would say to parishioners or anyone that speaks to me, despite the excellent speech from Deputy Alex Curtis is sort of shaking his head there, but I do think it was. But then, as you can all say, both Deputy Joseph and I would say that, wouldn't we? The answer that we give to islanders about why can we not revert to where we were is quite simple. If you transported those islanders back to my former parish, which I was privileged to represent, there were house upon house that had completely inadequate provision. I visited constituent after constituent who were being asked by government to live in totally inappropriate provision. And it was that underinvestment, and the underinvestment was because of, to a large extent, two things. One is it was always easy to give away repairs budget from any given department, and we see that the Minister for Infrastructure is dealing with that in his department now. And secondly was the rental policy. The rental policy was based upon affordability and had no relevance at that time to the condition or repairs and renewals of those buildings. And so over decades, the social housing that we provided as a States Assembly was appalling and was an embarrassment. And for my part, I am strongly against us going back to any system which would start us again on that trajectory. And therefore, though I know that we come to the review from different sides of the political spectrum, that is an argument that we will have to have in due course, because I know my colleagues with whom I'm in coalition with have a different view and believe that affordability should be part of a rents policy. They've been quite clear about that in what the platform that they stood for election on. My argument is, and remains, and I think we've heard it today, that the affordability issue is dealt with through income support policies. And the model that Andium was able, or the government was able to go out and get borrowing in order to do that massive capital investment in Andium was based on 90% of market rents. Deputy Joseph is right, the private sector market is not functioning. We may disagree, or it might be different levers which have resulted in that dysfunction of the private sector, but both parts of the market, be that social provision or private provision, need to work together. And therefore, if you have a dysfunctioning or a congested private sector, that does affect the rents and the comparability between private sector and social sector. So for that reason alone, a review would be a good thing, because I hope that out of such a review, there is this acknowledgement that perhaps, in hindsight, the introduction of the adjustment on buy-to-let property isn't working, and it was introduced for all of the good reason, but actually, as with any legislature and government, we can be so slow from the inception of an idea to the implementation of it that the conditions into which we implement a lever have totally changed, and therefore we see in hindsight that maybe that's made things worse rather than better. So we can't do anything from my perspective, and we heard the nervousness of the Treasury Minister about the Andium model, because that 400 million in borrowing has to be paid back, otherwise ultimately we'll be in that situation where the great new accommodation that people are living in will not be repaired, and it will fall into disrepair as it's done in the past. I sometimes think, listening to some of my colleagues, that perhaps Andium has been too successful, and we now have some arguments being made from some parts of the political spectrum that they would like to see more social housing and a contracting of the private sector. That is a perfectly legitimate political position to take. These are the arguments that we should be having in this assembly. These are the very things that we should be debating and asking ourselves, what is the structure of the market and what is the provision that we want islanders to be able to access? So I do now worry that in a dysfunctioning housing market, the social sector is crowding out the private sector. Certainly it is from, and this is where Deputy Alex Curtis was asking questions yesterday, certainly it is in the rental 1 or 2 bedroom flat markets where, as Deputy Ozef reminded us, in the private sector it just does not financially stack up now to build those new developments. And so we're in a situation where we're sat with lots of permissions but nobody going to start developing because they just can't make it financially stack up, and therefore they can't get the borrowing, and therefore we don't have the supply. Not to mention the other focus, which I know the Housing Minister is really keen on adjusting us to, which is the 3-bedroomed house rather than the flats in an urban setting, but the 3-bedroomed or greater in a rural setting. That again has to be a split between private and social housing. And so we might have come at this from different angles, and I really enjoyed listening to some of the speeches of members who are going to vote against this review, because much of what they said I agreed with. I just come to a different conclusion, that actually a review can be beneficial. Hopefully I've set some of the parameters around what I would be prepared to support, but that won't come as any surprise to the Housing Minister or the Social Security Minister, because they'd say, well, he would say that, wouldn't he, coming from his political persuasion. But a review, therefore, I think can add value and can be important, because to be clear, like the Cynnydd of Trinity, I could not support Deputy Raluca's original proposition for all of the reasons that I've just articulated, but I can support a review. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Kovacs, you're the next to speak. I know you're in some discomfort, and of course you may address the Assembly seated if you wish.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm in a bit of pain, and thank you to all the members that try to mitigate that. What I want to highlight is the way this assembly works. With every proposition, we try, at least myself, no matter which government was, I always tried to find the common ground, to try to find a way forward wherever was possible. And is no different in this case as well. No matter who the minister is, if it's a party colleague or not, I'm approaching the minister responsible of that proposition to see if we can find that common ground forward. Obviously, I'm very grateful that wider acceptance within this amendment was found with the Council of Ministers, and conversations we were having with the Social Security Minister, and I know we've heard from the Treasury Minister as well. I don't want this to be targeted in any different way than it is, and we should look at the principle of what this proposition does and what this amendment will do. And why I'm mindful to accept this is purely because I think that is a way forward, and would be more meaningful to have that happening rather than trying to tie it to a deadline, to one option, when the plans that could be brought forward could be multiple. We could have a committee debate, we could have each of us contribution, even combine of what those options will come, and decide further. So my proposition asks the Assembly to support a clear principle: the social rents in Jersey should be set at level that does not cause rental stress. On purpose, I didn't put any definition within the text of the proposition because I don't want to tie it to the definition. That's the definition we have at the moment, but that's why the reference in the report, but doesn't say nowhere that this can't be reviewed to make it brought to the realities of the social tenants currently. So the definition as it stands today is based on spending 30% or more of one's income rent. It has been in use for a decade, and while the definition may still be useful, I agree that it's worth reviewing during the course of this work to ensure it still reflects particularly tenants' experience in light of rising prices and persistent affordability pressures across many aspects of life. I have accepted the Minister's amendment as it does not remove the heart of the proposal, but instead adds a structured path forward without tying the hands of a future Assembly. It allows a full review to be undertaken alongside consultation, engagement, and the necessary financial modeling. I could have come with a certain proposal, a certain way forward, and that's how my proposition started. But I realized it won't be fair because as a backbencher, I won't have the resources to cost everything. It's a very complex matter, and in no circumstances, well, I don't want any development to be halted because that's also needed. I had conversations with Andium, with the Treasury officers responsible of that, with the other social housing providers, with social security officers, and that brought the wider view of how complex this process would be and why it needs to be looked at more than one option to make sure that on long term this would be a sustainable option brought back. I believe that's a responsible approach and one that ensures any future changes are based on proper analysis and dialogue with tenants and social housing providers alike, making sure that while we find options to reduce social rents for tenants, these don't halt the development. I'm also mindful of the roadmap that was referenced, presented in July 2023 by Deputy War, then Housing Minister, for improving access to social housing in Jersey. That roadmap outlined the need to review the social rents policy as part of the long-term housing strategy, with the focus on ensuring rental subsidies are targeted to those in greatest need. It's clear that this work is timely, and we all want the same thing: to improve lives of tenants, to make them have affordable rent. Name it rental stress, name it in any way, but it needs to be truly affordable because that's why social housing was created. So although the amendment removes a fixed date for implementing the policy, accepting it, I believe it is the right decision for several reasons. It locks the principle that social housing rents must not cause rental stress, a powerful and long overdue acknowledgement that affordability must be at the heart of housing policy. It allows in-depth work to begin immediately. By accepting the amendment, we give the Minister the space and flexibility to explore practical, affordable models that don't halt development or weaken housing providers. It secures cross-ministerial commitment. The amendment brings Treasury and Social Security into the conversation, ensuring the policy is financially sustainable and linked to wider social and fiscal strategies. And this is very complex work. It improves our chances of success for tenants on long term too. With proper research and collaboration, we can build a plan that works, not only in principle, but also in practice. Ready to inform decisions in this Assembly's term for implementation in the next one, but not tying their hands. Being an electoral year next year, obviously the capacity and the work would be reduced. Hence the timeline not being necessarily achievable. So in accepting this amendment, I didn't feel that we are watering down the purpose of this proposition. We are laying the groundwork to align social rents with affordability and to shift from managing the symptoms to addressing the cause. And I urge you to support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jean.
Thank you, sir. And I absolutely support that there needs to be the principle that we need to work out how to support those in our community on rental stress. But I would like to just ask the Minister, because we're still on the amendment of the Minister, in his summing up, I'd just like to ask, just reviewing kind of in the past what's happened around rental stress. Of course, the last government, Deputy Moore's government, in the Common Strategic Priorities, specifically pulls out decreasing rental stress as a key priority within that. And as Deputy Kovacs has just mentioned, following that, the then Housing Minister set up this roadmap, and I believe in July 2023 there was a report put to the States Assembly, R121 2023, that was very clear in saying that there is going to be a review on the social rent policy. So it was very clear in July 2023 that we, as a State Assembly, were informed that there was going to be a review of the social rents policy. Of course, a couple of months later, we had a change of government. And I'd like to ask the Minister why he didn't carry that particular element of work forward. He carried others forward, like reducing the criteria for access for age, for example, for the gateway. But I'd like to understand that, because in his transcript to a scrutiny panel when he first came to us as a newly housing minister, he was quite clear about the need for looking at rental stress reducing. And he says specifically, and I take from the transcript of March 2024, I want to see the numbers of low-income islanders living in rental stress reduced. And so he's very clear to us in the scrutiny panel at that time, when he first comes in the first few months of his reign, that this is something that he'd like to do. Of course, in the past, there is already this decision on this roadmap that there would be this review. So I'm assuming, and it would be interesting to hear if actually officers had started working on this review in the past government. So there was already something, and if it's not okay. But why didn't the Minister carry on this? Because we're 15 months into this new government, and now this is an amendment to say, oh yeah, now we have to do something. Now we actually have to do a rental review. It's a good idea. Thank you, Deputy Kovacs, for bringing this to us, but this is what we should do. Why wasn't it already done 15 months ago, when the Housing Minister told the scrutiny panel that this is a concern? So I would really like to hear from the Minister, because this is where I think the discussions are happening in this chamber around. It's not about whether we, and myself, I won't put words in anyone else's mouth, but for me, it's an extremely important point that we absolute this principle that we look at ensuring that a kind of government institution like Andium doesn't put islanders at rental stress. That absolutely should be absolute key principle. But what I don't understand is why we're having to spend now the whole morning discussing this, when potentially we could have been already doing this. Well, it had started to be identified and already doing it in the last government. It was in the roadmap. It was already in the report in July 2023. It was already highlighted as an important point by the Minister in March 2024. And now we're in the middle of May 2025, and this will potentially come to us in a very packed agenda for the end of the year in January 2026. So I'd like to hear from the Minister and how he feels that he has now the resources to do that, if he felt that for the last 15 months he hasn't had the resources and officers' time to do that. How is he going to have suddenly the time when he has still an important RTL amendments to get through as well? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the amendment? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir, and can I thank all members for taking part in this debate. There was a suggestion relatively early on in the debate that I might have shown a degree of favouritism towards the proposer of this proposition compared to how I've approached other things in the past. And so I wanted to start, sir, by absolutely pleading guilty to that. Deputy Kovac is without a doubt one of my favourite States members. I'm in constant awe at her tenacity and energy that she brings and her deep care and compassion for the people that she represents, and it's an absolute privilege to count her as a colleague. And I'm also happy to say, sir, that the other 47 of you come in a close second place to that. Sir, I think that some members have made a bit of a mountain out of a molehill out of this, if I may say so, sir. The amendment which has, in a sense, I think, kind of been co-produced by myself, the Social Security Minister, the Treasury Minister, and the proposer, outlines a solid way forward that we can all get behind, notwithstanding the fact that we're not always aligned completely on our political outlook anyway. But it provides a good way forward that will help us look at how we could address issues to do with rental stress in social housing in the future without committing us to unintended consequences at this point. So, sir, I think that there is actually a really legitimate reason for voting against this amendment, and that would be, sir, if you were a States member who believed that today must be the day that you vote in support of committing us to change our social housing rent system by January 2027, irrespective of knowing right now what the consequences of that would be. Now, obviously, that's a legitimate position to take, and any member who wanted to oppose the amendment on that basis, so they could take that position, would be completely within their rights to do so, sir. But I didn't hear any member specifically advocate against the amendment, so they could do that. What I did hear, so I think, were several members, I think, get it wrong about what I'm able to do with or without a resolution from the States Assembly, and how I'm able to pursue an agenda in line with our democratic norms. Deputy Curtis, when he kind of kicks this off by raising his concerns about it, towards the end of his speech, and I made a note about this, he said that he wanted to find a path forward that would let the minister get on with his job. But of course, he's advocating a course of action which I say doesn't help me get on with my job. Deputy Renouf had said that the minister would be free to do this work even without this amendment and proposition going through. I don't believe that is the case, sir, and I don't believe that for two reasons. One, sir, is that if the Assembly has a resolution before it asking a minister to do something, and the Assembly specifically votes against that resolution, and the minister then the next day goes ahead and starts doing it anyway, I think there would be justification for saying the minister's in contempt of the Assembly for doing that. And the most recent decision of the Assembly would be the one that stands. So if members vote against me conducting a review of something, I'm not going to ignore that and then go ahead and do it anyway, which is why the amended proposition is very helpful and enables me to go ahead and do that. But crucially, sir, and Deputy Curtis was absolutely wrong when he said that that kind of review could be business as usual. It can't, sir, because though the responsibility politically for the social housing rent system sits with the housing minister, and there's lots of things within that I can do and minor things that I can tweak that make things a little bit better. I've been working with Andium to try to have a better right-sizing policy, because we know that that's an issue that the rent system makes complicated. You know, I can work with them to try to come up with tweaks that help overcome that, sir. But on anything more substantial, I am absolutely powerless to come up with drastic changes to the system that don't have huge implications for the remits of other ministers. So I'm the Minister for Housing. I am not the shareholder representative for Andium. I'm not politically responsible for the governance and the financial arrangements of Andium, and of course the financial return that they provide to government. And I'm not the Minister for Social Security who is responsible for income support policies. So there are all sorts of changes I could, using my existing political authority, unilaterally pursue on the rents policy that would have potentially dire consequences for other parts of government, or have dire consequences for the social housing system. So if I wanted, I'd have to double check I've got the virus to do this, but if I think I could decide that I don't want social housing rents capped at 80% of the market rate anymore, I want them capped at a different percentage, a lower one. If I go ahead and do that, I would be destroying Andium's building programme, because their model is based on the current system. That's the projections that they got. And though, of course, that would be great for the tenants who would immediately benefit from a fall in their rents, it would be betraying people who might need social housing in the future, who won't have it available, because the building programme would have been disrupted by that. And as an individual minister, I am powerless to do anything to avoid that, because the power to potentially avoid that would sit with the wider government. So I can't unilaterally go ahead and do that. And of course, so if I wanted to find any other kind of tweak that imposed requirements on social security to work with Andium on a kind of more bespoke affordability-based rent setting, again, I would be creating all sorts of bureaucracy and potential income support consequences that I, as Minister, don't have the authority to go and do unilaterally, and if I attempted it, I'd be causing way more problems than I would be solving. That, sir, is why it has to be cross-ministerial, to ensure that anything that is looked at is done credibly, that we're able to identify unintended consequences, able to report back to the Assembly what those consequences would be, because the Assembly would be free to say that it's prepared to stomach particular consequences, and it'd be free to say that it's not prepared to tolerate other kinds of consequences. But my team in isolation are not able to do that. We would have to be working alongside Treasury and Social Security, and that's why, sir, parts of the amendment address that to make it clear where that will sit. So there were questions that were put to me by other members. Apologies if I miss any, and if I do, obviously, please feel free to call for clarification on that. I'll try to address them and some of them were similar questions, so I won't necessarily answer them twice. But so questions were posed to me about previous commitments to review the social housing rent system and why that hadn't been proceeded with so far. So I will, I'll try to be charitable in some of my response to this, sir, but when I took on the role of Housing Minister, I very quickly got to work in realigning the agenda, and my priority in doing that was to ensure that there was a decent and credible chance of actually getting things delivered in this term of office that would be to the benefit of islanders who were in need of that kind of action from government. It was not to spend time on things that were hopeless and weren't going to be achieved even with the best will in the world, and it wasn't to spend lots of time and resources on things that don't actually help people, but exercises within government that involve going around in circles or analysing things to then do nothing with the analysis that you come up with. And so I very quickly realigned what the existing agenda was to maximise the chances of things getting over the line. The key thing I did there was to realign the proposed reforms to the residential tenancy law. I don't believe that there was the faintest chance of anything making it to this Assembly in its format that it was that I inherited, and I made changes to that to make sure something could come to the Assembly, which obviously I have been able to do because it has been lodged. And that meant, of course, directing people in my team to spend their days coming into work and doing that work. They have only so much capacity to do what they can with the time that they've got. But having been able to do that and get a draft residential tenancy law ready to go, and now being at a point where we're soon to be launching the next round of First Step, and that will be the final round of it this year, there will be some capacity available soon, which means that I have an officer who is able to take the lead on this, where beforehand I did not have that capacity to do that. So in that sense, the timing of the proposition and now amended version of it is very helpful, and I think it's credible that we will get done what this proposition will ask us to do, where beforehand I have to say I was sceptical about whether there was actually any realistic chance of things that were items on the agenda actually being delivered. So that, I believe, we'll be able to proceed with. So Deputy Morell had asked about how this would be presented to the Assembly, and I confess that I think it's worded better in the actual wording of the amendment than the report to it, which referred to seeking endorsement from the Assembly. I should clarify that it's not my intention to seek endorsement from the Assembly in the form of a proposition that lays out options. It is my intention, as the Chief Minister mentioned, to present a report to the Assembly. That if you do it as a report rather than a proposition, you can put multiple options. You can outline in them what the implications of them might be. You can look at options that involve keeping things as they are. You can look at options that involve tweaking things but based on where we are today, or you can look at more wholesale changes. But it would not be my intention to ask the Assembly to immediately commit to anything like that when we, I mean, certainly today we have no idea what that would look like or what the financial implications of it would be, but I hope that report would shine some light on it, and that could inform future debates. And if members found those options particularly attractive, they would be free then to pursue them politically, and the next government, of course, would be free to use that report to inform its agenda. Or it could decide that it's not a priority. That will be down to the democratic will of the island, ultimately. So that is why I think that the amended proposition paths out a good way forward. We will be able to have a review and discussion on something that is of interest to many thousands of islanders who live in social housing and the rest of the island who care about living on a socially and economically just island, and we can do so working together, bringing the relevant people around the table and coming up with something that is informative and useful for the rest of us, that is credible in the information that it contains and doesn't sign us up to pursuing unintended consequences right now when we don't know what those would be. I think that that's a really sensible way forward, and I'm very grateful to the Social Security Minister, the Treasury Minister, and of course my favourite States member, Deputy Raluca Kovac, in putting this on the agenda so that we can move forward. And that's why I would urge members to support the amendment and vote for the, and call for the appel, sir.
Thank you, Minister.
So can I ask
Deputy Gardner, I think you have your light on first. You've got a point of clarification for the Minister?
Minister answered the question. He's not bringing to the Assembly.
Do you have one as well?
Point of order,
clarification?
a point of order, if I may, sir.
Yes.
The Minister argued that if there was a vote against the amendment, then he would not have the virus to pursue a review. I wonder if the Chair can confirm that the vote is on an amendment, which is about one particular version of a review, with one particular timetable. And if the vote is against the amendment, then we would return debate to the main proposition, which contains a different version of a review. So if a vote against this amendment does not, even on the narrow terms of this debate, and ignoring the previous debate votes on the CSP, prevent the Minister from conducting a review of his own choosing.
Yes, but that's right. But I can't comment on what he said about virus because I'm in no position to do so. But you're right, we'll simply continue the debate on the proposition as unamended if the amendment is rejected. The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. And I invite the greffier to open the voting on the amendment. If all members have the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the greffier to close the vote.
Sir, beg your pardon, it's the Constable of St Lawrence here.
Yes?
I couldn't find where I was meant to vote this time. I managed it last time. I wonder if I can just record my vote orally, sir, please.
Yes. I haven't quite finished my sentence when you came online. So yes.
Thank you, sir. I would like to vote pour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Any more online votes, greffier, I need to be aware of? One more. And what was that? Thank you. And the amendment has been adopted. 32 votes pour, 12 votes const, and 1 abstention. 2 abstentions.
So can we have the contra and the abstention?
Those members voting contre: Deputies Doublé, Ayer, Gardner, Moore, Osoph, Ward, Miles, Renouf, Alex Curtis, Barbara Ward, Wilson and Stevenson. And those members abstaining: Deputies Jearn and Andrews.
We now return to the proposition as amended. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition as amended? Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. I'm really glad we had that debate. I think this made it a far more meaningful discussion about propositions than otherwise what would have been perhaps quite short debate. So I thank members for their contributions in that regard and giving the Assembly the chance to debate it separately. I voted against for the reasons I stated. I think they were clear. But I would like to highlight a few things now we're in the main debate on the proposition as amended. Firstly, straight to what the Minister said, which is he believes he wouldn't have the vires to do this work. A, if we vote against this now as amended, and B, should this not have been tabled to the Assembly in the first place. I think at the end of the day, the Minister can interpret his portfolio and has a wide mandate to pursue policy. And this is a particular wording, as Deputy Renouf highlighted, and it not only is about a review, but it asks us to agree to a principle, to a definition of something we do not know, and I will return to that. The second one is, I'm surprised the Minister doesn't feel he has a mandate to pursue policy options without the Assembly's support. Most work of government is cross-cutting. The Council can set up cross-ministerial working groups. Only yesterday in the Future Economy Programme update did the Minister for Economy highlight how he works on what could be broad policy changes in his portfolio with other ministers, whether financial services or the Minister for the Environment. Indeed, actually, his Future Fit Retail roadmap or strategy highlighted direct changes in legislation that other ministers may want to do. He didn't make those changes, sir, but he certainly worked across the government to pursue a cross-government approach to challenging complex issues. And I don't see how the Minister doesn't have the power to walk across the ministerial floor and knock on the door of the Ministers for Social Security and Treasury and ask for their support in considering options. He wouldn't be, I hope anyway, looking to bring wide whole-scale changes into action without either the support of those ministers or the Assembly. So the ability to do the work, I think, is fine. Deputy Tadier brought up an interesting question about assets and how we evaluate this, which then came up with a slightly contradictory point from Deputy Miller in not wanting to see means testing at the point of the, or was it Deputy Gorst, one of the ministers on the point of the social housing provided but on income support. The Minister, without consultation, brought through a change to the social housing gateway criteria, despite members highlighting concerns, in which he fully removed the asset cap for those who could be in social housing. The definition is currently presented for rental stress is out of income, not of assets. One could reasonably be sitting in social housing under this new policy with well over £1 million in assets, with a low income, and their rent would be set on that. And I guess that highlights the challenges with how we bring this forward. Deputy Balash re-raised, and I'd like to highlight this in the main debate, since we now have to agree this. What are we voting on? What is the vote for a principled decision on rental stress? Is it the definition Deputy Kovacs highlights, which is the 2015 definition of 30% of gross income, or is it up for debate? Because I'm going to have to explain to my constituents what I vote for, to parishioners, maybe to the media, and they will say, why did you vote for or against this? And they will say, so you agree with that definition? I go, well, maybe not. The Minister said it needs a review. So if the main mover could clarify what the principle we are addressing, I think that's really important. Deputy Stevenson then highlighted that this is the work already committed by the government, and I think this is a really good reason you can vote against this, if you wish. And it would set a very dangerous precedent, sir, I think, that any member could bring a proposition reaffirming a minister's legislative or policy programme, and the Assembly would be bound to accept that proposition by fear that if we don't agree it, we are nullifying a minister's own portfolio. And I say this with perhaps apologies to the next mover of a proposition today, where I may be unable to support them, because the minister has said, well, I'm doing the work. I'm in fact statutorily obliged to do the work. And we have a choice as an Assembly. Do we either agree to things because it's already being done, or reject it because it's already being done? I think it would be informing a higher quality of debate and work if we understand what Minister's work programme is, and we know this is on the work programme from the CSP. We allow them to do the work, and the propositions that we bring to the Assembly should really address things beyond that. But I'll leave it there. I think much of the principles are important. I look forward to hearing the rest of it. I could still have my mind changed on this one. But I really want to know that if I'm voting for a principle, somebody can lay down what that principle is. Otherwise, I feel I'm signing up to an open-ended journey. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry if I put the cat amongst the pigeons earlier but I'm pleased that we've actually got the government actually clearly now explaining. And I think the reason why I almost was going to support the government amendment, but then I heard, I think the housing minister say he wasn't actually going to bring forward his proposals for a debate. With there I heard effectively another example of what we saw with Deputy War's proposal, that actually I think this Assembly expressed a view with the good sense of Deputy War, and then the Minister issued it's not an encyclical so for a ministerial decree, but he issued a ministerial direction to effectively not actually use the consensus form of government, which I thought we had. I think the proposal was that it should go to a scrutiny panel. And so I think that's what the debate was. I think the scrutiny panel engaged in some wanting to actually have a debate about the issue, but they didn't. The minister just did what he wanted. And we heard it and we had to read it. I was sorry about that. So I think that overall now, this amendment is a tepid review. It's tepid. And it's by January 2026. And basically, I've heard nothing from the housing minister. I wanted a housing minister, sir. I wanted a housing minister that was going to be banging on the doors of all the relevant ministers to make sure that there was not rental stress and housing stress in any part of our housing market. But where is the housing minister with banging the doors? This is a proposal just about social rent. And I agree with my friend, and I salute Deputy Kovacs. I know she's in some difficulty today, and I really think she's showing enormous courage as she does. And she will know that there is stress in our constituency in St Saviour. But it's not only social rented. It's not only social rented. It's across the whole housing market. And if she were to have asked, and I don't blame her for not, because I'm not a member of the Reform Party, but if she'd have actually wanted to do a St Saviour proposal, I think that we would have agreed, because I agree with her that there's social stress in social housing, but there's housing stress in all sectors of the market. The private sector market is in disarray. Average social rents are £1,180 per month, according to the 2024 numbers. we've got a completely unknown picture in relation to the private sector market. The Minister says that he doesn't not like the private sector rental market, yet I've asked him in this assembly and he's giving mixed messages. We've got the the tenancy agreement coming forward. I'm not sure whether this is a fully signed up proposal by the Council of Ministers. I know that there is some dissenting voices, I think, even from within the ranks of the Council of Ministers on this. And I don't know where the Chief Minister is on relation to the rental market. All I know is it is causing landlords to take fright. They're actually getting out of the market. And as the as the External Relations and Financial Services Minister said, there is issues with the private sector rental market. He put his nail right on the head, sir. You would not invest in a private sector rental property. As I had to explain to a member yesterday, the surcharge is on the whole amount. It's not just on the incremental amount, it's on the whole amount. The first pound of a second home is 3%, so it's not like the stepped change of stamp duty, where you basically pay more, sir. Stamp duty is a friction on the market, sir. That's what Dame Kate Barker, our past eminent chair of FPP, said. I tried to deal with stamp duty to basically remove the friction to make the market work. Well, the market isn't working in terms of people buying homes. We've got stress with people sitting on homes that they can't sell, downsizers that can't sell their homes to people who want family homes. I would say that we should actually give them a stamp duty holiday to incentivise them to get out of their large homes, which Deputy War and others have said they can't afford, and give them an incentive. Maybe buy some of these surplus in requirement 2-bedroom and 1-bedroom flats, which the Constable of Trinity and his planning panel have passed, that can't get built. But nobody's going to build a rental property, and a lot of people aren't building sale properties because the market is in such uncertainty. We've seen a plunging of prices. I know that's lovely, because actually, we all thought that the housing market was out of control. But is it actually going to come into some sort of control? Are we going to see an end to spiralling, falling prices? Because that's about confidence. And when is the government going to say enough's enough with the housing market, that it's in free fall? We've seen housing prices fall in real terms by a larger amount than I think that we've seen ever. We've seen a fall in the number of properties being transacted. And people think that it's fine. It's a bit like the discussion we had yesterday about inflation. When inflation goes up, and then it goes down again, and you basically link into prices, you've got the baked-in increase that you've already got. It's already baked in. You've got the increases in the higher cost of inflation in Jersey having been then fixed. But if inflation simply just carries on, you've got those higher prices baked in. What we're seeing with the housing market is we're seeing basically housing prices fall, and they're in free fall. And so where's the confidence? Are banks lending? No, there are very, very difficult to get mortgage situations now, as the Financial Services Minister said. It's very difficult to get a mortgage because you can't get a valuation. And it's very difficult when you've got to get a 90% mortgage, which a lot of people have got to get. So I'm afraid, sir, and whilst I'm on my feet, sir, if I would see a housing minister that would be knocking at the doors of our constables and our other opponents of the Bridging Island plan who said no to greenfield sites in their parishes, I would actually have some sympathy to him. But he voted against every single greenfield site, and he's done nothing to basically bring forward the supply side. The supply side. I'll say it again. The supply side is the problem. It's the supply side in social renting, in private rental, in first-time buyers, in downsizers. It's the right type of supply. And this assembly has failed. It's failed since the Bridging Island plan failed to deliver hundreds of units based upon the actual data that was there. I'm afraid that Jersey's, the people that are leaving the island and people that now losing confidence and basically getting out of Jersey, That is not good enough to say that we don't need to build supply. I've been going on about the fuel farm, sir, to try and give the Chief Minister the opportunity of having some brownfield land that he can bring forward some of those brownfield sites all over the countryside, put them down at La Collette and build some homes in the parishes. It's actually to do with creating employment land and housing land that I want to basically liberate my friend, the Infrastructure Minister, so that he doesn't have a Buncefield designation on the fuel farm. Anybody that thinks that Jersey Gas is going to be there in a few years' time after what we've heard, I don't know, but we'll see. But basically, we need to be using the land we've got for housing and employment land in the right way that Deputy Curtis says. And are we doing that? No, we're not. And this proposition was commendable by Deputy Kovacs. She's right. If we have our time again, we wouldn't be having a situation where we would be needing, perhaps, to bring forward a situation that social rents would be 70, 60% of market, because the market would be working. The real problem and the real elephant in the room is the market isn't working. And the market isn't working because there isn't enough supply. And some constables may huff and may puff, and some members may not like it, because NIMBYism and not building in parish is a real problem. It's always a problem, but it's got to be dealt with. And we've got to be honest with our constituents. If we want in St Saviour to give a hope of housing, I met only a resident of St Saviour yesterday who said, Deputy, I'm never going to get on the housing ladder. And I said, Jolly, I would like to work every single day to get you on the housing ladder, to get you to buy a home. I can see my constable nodding, and I'm pleased about that, because maybe we need to rethink carefully, very carefully, some of the decisions that we're taking in the Bridging Island plan. And that's not a threat, that's not in any way saying that, but we are going to have to deliver some of the supply. I'm delighted with St John's. I can see their proposal up at Zion. I think it's marvellous. I think that was the constable bringing forward to it. The constable of St Clement has done this, St Martin has brought stuff forward as well. We all have a responsibility. I don't want to see any more homes sold off because Andham need to pay for their building programme without a commensurate replacement unit of a 3-bedroom house. I've counted the number of Grasset Park units that have been sold, and Gordon Le Breton Close, and all the others in my constituency. And if I would like to see a commensurate replacement. We're all against Margaret Thatcher's sell-off of social housing units. Everybody doesn't like that, but I can say to members, it's happening now because we need to fund Andhiam's home improvement scheme, and I would be happy with that. I'm delighted for the people that have got on the first step scheme. I really am. They've got on the housing ladder. Fantastic. But you've got to create the equivalent social housing unit to somebody to rent. And that's not being done. And that's my problem. And so I commend Deputy Kovacs for bringing forward her proposition, but I do think we need a review, and a frankly honest review, about all the issues of housing stress, because there's housing stress in social rented, private rental, non-qualified rental, people trying to sell their homes, first-time buyers, downsizers, and the whole of the market. And if that's uncomfortable to listen to, I think there is an element of truth in that. And I'd like this Assembly to end its term of office in a few months' time, in a year's time, with some confidence being put back into the housing policies, joined up policies in relation to planning, housing minister, treasury, and social security, having policies that work in the interests of islanders overall, not in the interest of just a few, because it's the many we need to look after, and I don't think we're doing that. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy.
Sir, could I ask for a point of clarification?
Prepared to accept that? Yes.
Sir, would the Deputy who said that the Housing Minister wasn't working with constables to provide additional homes accept that the Housing Minister is working with this constable to find right-sized homes? Thank you, sir.
I think if that's a result of a minister in the Council of Ministers working together, great. But is he doing that same thing with the more populous parishes? I don't know. And I haven't seen it. I've been trying and I haven't done it. Well done, St John and the Housing Minister, but it isn't enough, is what I'm trying to say.
Does any other member speak on this proposition? Deputy Tallier.
Thanks, sir. So I've been starting to read Bill Bryson recently, and the beauty of Bill Bryson is that he's an expert on everything, sir, but sometimes I realise I don't need to be reading Bill Bryson. I can just come to the Assembly and listen to Deputy Joseph talk, and it's a lot quicker. So you wonder if some of these people who are speaking have not been in government ever, because I look back and think of who was it that set Andium up under its current constitution, where essentially we really set Andium up in many ways to fail, and it's been set up and it's succeeded despite that. So we set up Andium with a £400 million debt, I think it's been alluded to today. It has to pay a return back to the government of Jersey. If it wasn't set up with that, but we set it up on a model that they had to make a certain return to the government of Jersey every year because it was saddled with debt from the beginning. There's absolutely nothing to stop the government or the future governments to say to Andium, which we own outright, we're going to write off that debt. You can completely redesign your business model if you want to, so that you don't have to give us that return, and that actually you can invest all of that money which your tenants are paying, and including some tenants, of course, who may not get any access to income support, some who are partly on income support, and they could have a completely different model of rent, which ensures that their tenants are not in rental stress. Members are talking as if they don't have any concept of what rental stress might mean, whereas we know that actually, although there are various different definitions, as a rule of thumb, it's reckoned that a household spending 30% or more of its income can be considered under housing stress, and under extreme housing stress if it's spending more than 50%. So let's look at what some of those figures might mean in reality for our constituents in Jersey. So if we take an example of an income support component, the maximum component for that would be granted to somebody who lives in a private two-bedroom flat would be £362.74 a week, which equates to about £1,572 a month, sir. Now, if we look at that individual who, let's say they are paying that rent, they're paying £1,572 for a two-bedroom flat to a private landlord, they would need to be earning at least £5,239 or having that as their family income to be able to pay that. Otherwise, if it's any less, they would be in rental stress. And I would ask, are there many people who get an income, and is that a net income? Is it a gross income? Because presumably that's what they need to live on. That is still quite a high amount for an individual. It could, of course, be a one-parent home with a child who's having to rent a two-bedroom flat. So these are quite significant figures. And let's not fool ourselves that actually for centuries and even recent decades, and I would say even today, this assembly has been full of the rentier class. So it's the class who themselves don't live in Andium normally. They might be the exceptions, but actually they have a number of properties which they will rent out and get a rental income for. And it is that class which has been making housing policy up until this point. And so, of course, it is understandable that when some members stand up to pontificate on the plight of the poor and what rental stress might mean, is that those words might ring hollow in the ears of some listening outside the assembly. So let's bring ourselves back to reality, because I can't help feeling that there's been deliberate heavy weather being made by a would-be opposition rabble in this assembly, because unfortunately they're not organised like we were when we were in opposition, sir, trying to find fault with something which is fundamentally, should be axiomatically obvious to all of us, which is the amended proposition that says the principle is that social housing rents and the income support policies should not put tenants into rental stress. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that we can't agree to that? Why should we not give a further mandate to the Minister for Housing to say, please go ahead and do that? Because we have a situation now in Jersey where many people in our community are living under rental stress. And I hear absolutely what the Constable of Trinity is saying, that there are individuals in mortgage stress, and they may well be in mortgage stress, of course, depending on what their rates of interest are and whether they fixed, etc., whether they're on interest only. I suppose there's a key difference there is that people make a choice to buy a house which becomes a home for them, hopefully, and not everybody has that choice, and that is something which the Minister, I think, wants to give to more people, is that an opportunity to buy their own homes. But of course, the more private rentals there are out there, which are being effectively cross-subsidised by the income support system because tenants can't otherwise afford to pay them, then the more private rentals that there are out there, the less homes there are for first-time buyers to buy. That is just simple mathematics. So I don't want to make heavy weather of it, sir, simply to say that I think we've had a good debate on this morning. If members feel so strongly about housing matters and they wish to seek re-election, then that's what your manifesto, that's what the manifesto is for. Come up with coherent positions that will actually make people's lives in Jersey better. But of course, you can't be all things to all people. You can't, on the one hand, go to those who own their properties and say, we want to make sure that your property prices never come down, and go to people who can't afford house prices in Jersey and say, we want to make sure that you can afford to buy houses. And I think there is that conundrum, which I think Deputy Gorse touched on, is do we use the income support system to cross-subsidise unaffordable and unsustainably high rents? Or do we actually say that when it comes to social rents, be it in Andium or in the trust sector, we say, no, actually, we are not forced to set those prices at such a high level because we have a different operating model. Our operating model is not one of profit, but it's actually one of sustainability and providing for our tenants. Therefore, we don't have to have any regard for market rents, and we can just set them at a rate which is simply would cover our costs and enable us to reinvest in our stock, to pay for the maintenance and to pay our staff to do their jobs properly. I think it's very much the latter of those proposals which the public would want us to do, and not to follow a broken private rental model which puts so many into rental stress. There's just one or two considerations I do want to raise at this point, because this is an opportunity for us, in fact, if we want to be constructive, to tell the Minister what we would like him to do, or to give considerations which he and his team might not necessarily be thinking of up until this point. And there is a consideration, of course, about how we do work with the private sector, because there's this idea that was set up that the private sector were somehow to fulfil the shortage of homes that were being provided by the social sector. And, for example, is there an option that we could give to private landlords to make them social landlords? Is there some kind of scheme that we could ask private landlords to sign up to that would give them some of the benefits of being social landlords and give some of their tenants the benefits of having some kind of social tenancy? And what might those benefits be? Well, let's just look at one of them, is the fact that social landlords don't pay tax on their rental income. And I don't think we're suggesting that they should. You could, of course, say that the Andium return to government is a form of tax that they're paying back to government, but it's not exactly that. But of course, a private landlord, on their profits from their rental income, will have to pay 20% to the government, Andium, and the trust don't have to do that. So could it be possible that if a private landlord was willing to sign up to a social framework and keep their rents at a social level and make sure that their properties were maintained in the same way that Andium maintain their properties, that they could also get those benefits of not having to pay tax on their rental income, because effectively they're being a social landlord. But they might have to sign up to other criteria such as security of tenure and whatever the social housing providers do. These are just some ideas which the Minister might wish to consider, because one of the concerns I've got is that the disparity between those who find themselves in Andium, who've got the security of tenure, and those who would like to be in Andium but for whatever reason are not able to qualify for social housing. And I give that example, if we've got somebody receiving £1,500 a month to pay for a private tenancy, somebody might be getting exactly the same money to get an Andium flat, but we've no idea whether or not the two-bedroom flat is the same standard as the social rental flat. And I think there's an issue that we should be handing taxpayer money out for properties that may not be fit for standard. And I know the Minister would argue there is a residential tenancy law there. There are minimum standards, but I'd say that the minimum standards in the private sector vary greatly, whereas we know the beauty of social housing providers is that they're not perfect by any means. I've seen some terrible provision and some terrible damp conditions in the past, hopefully not so much today, but they vary less when it comes to social provision. So for my part, I wish the Minister luck, I wish the Council of Ministers luck. We do need to all take collective responsibility when it comes to these issues, but I think we need to accept that taking the profit element and the profit motive out of social housing and actually talking about sustainability, reinvestment and maintenance, something which in decades gone by wasn't the case, where social housing was simply seen as a cash cow for government. That has to stop, and I think that is being recognised, certainly by this Minister and hopefully this Council of Ministers.
Thank you, Deputy.
Sir, could I have a point of clarification?
You prepared to give that, Deputy? Yes, sir.
Yeah, could the Deputy say what he means by the model is broken, or a broken model?
Yes, Deputy.
Where does he want me to start, sir? I probably have to make a second speech and it would take me over my 15 minutes, so happy to speak to the member privately.
Thank you. I see the time. Is the adjournment proposed? Members wish to adjourn? 2:15.